Chapter 278. What? Winter Castle released the captives? After hearing the news of the captives, Marquis Dawson wasn't happy. Instead, he was shocked. His son, Count Falco, was still in Winter Castle. Why would the Golden Lion Legion suddenly release the captives? Moreover, even if the terms were agreed upon, Count Falco and Count Anko wouldn't sign a contract with the House of St. Hilda privately. Hence, this was definitely a conspiracy. Yes, Lord Mark. But the captives seemed to have a conflict with the Menham family. After hearing the report, Marquis Dawson's uneasiness grew. After thinking for a while, he decisively ran towards the Menham family's camp. When he entered the Menham family's territory, he was surrounded by a group of guards. "Bring me to see Marquis Menham." "Okay, Marquis Menham wants to see you." Marquis Dawson felt a tinge of anger as he looked at the group of fully armed and cold-faced soldiers. What did Marquis Menham mean? If he didn't come forward, was he going to capture him? Marquis Dawson suppressed his anger and came to the center of the Menham family's camp. "Marquis Menham, what do you mean by this?" Marquis Dawson asked angrily. "I want to ask you, Marquis Dawson, why did Winter Castle suddenly release the captives of your family?" "I don't know, but I feel that this might be a conspiracy of the House of St. Hilda." "Conspiracy? What conspiracy?" Marquis Menham wasn't moved. He looked at Marquis Dawson with suspicion. "Sowing discord," Marquis Dawson said in a deep voice. "From the start, the House of St. Hilda has been trying to sow discord between us. Could it be that you've forgotten about the peace agreement that required you to hand me over? They know that we can't trust each other, so they used this point to try to break us apart. The captives might be part of their conspiracy. Hence, at such times, we have to trust each other and be honest with each other. If I wanted to betray you, I wouldn't have come forward to explain myself." Hearing this, Marquis Menham's expression softened. He seemed to believe Marquis Dawson's words. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Then what do you think we should do now?" Marquis Dawson heaved a sigh of relief. Marquis Menham's attitude made him feel that there was still room for negotiation. "I think that the first thing we should do is to appease the captives who have been released. We can't let the brave warriors who have shed their blood for the dwarves feel disappointed. Then, we can interrogate the captives and find out why the Golden Lion Legion released them. On the other hand, we need to contact Anka and Falco as soon as possible." While Marquis Dawson was actively cooperating with Marquis Menham in an attempt to eliminate the negative impact of the sudden release of the captives, the situation was rapidly deteriorating in an unpredictable direction. The news of the captives being released quickly spread throughout the Dawson clan's camp. Unlike the Menham clan's resistance and suspicion, the Dawson clan's people were very willing to accept these captives. After all, those captives were their comrades and even their relatives. But when the news of the conflict between the captives and the Menham clan's army spread, the Dawson clan's officers were immediately filled with suspicion and anger. They all gathered outside Marquis Dawson's tent and wanted to ask what had happened. Why did the Menham clan attack their captives? But at this moment, Marquis Dawson had gone to meet Marquis Menham and wasn't in the camp. Without a leader, the Dawson clan's officers started arguing. Some wanted to rescue the captives, some wanted to clarify the situation, and some wanted to wait for Marquis Dawson's return before discussing. In short, the Dawson clan's camp was in a mess. At this moment, Wales was pushed out by the officers who were arguing endlessly. As the second son of Marquis Dawson, he didn't have much prestige in the army. But now, Marquis Dawson's whereabouts were unknown. Marquis Dawson's eldest son, Count Falco, had yet to return from chilly Winter City. Therefore, Wales became the most qualified person to lead the Dawson clan's army. Although everyone knew that Wales wasn't reliable, a mediocre leader was better than no leader at all. If this continued, the captives who had just been released would probably all be killed. Wales was panicking. But facing the burning gazes of the officers, he couldn't shrink back. He had to make a decision. The huge pressure made Wales shiver uncontrollably. He was sweating profusely and his mouth was dry. He forced himself to calm down, but he didn't dare to take responsibility. He just said, "I think we have to find Father first." Marquis Dawson went to the Menham clan. "We've already sent people to find him, but there's no response." An officer shouted, Wales was even more panicked. But then, a thought flashed through his mind and he blurted out. Not good. Markham wants to detain father and hand him over to the house of St. Hilda in exchange for their forgiveness. What? This sentence caused the Dawson clan officers to explode. It was the first time they heard such news. Then, the scene became even more chaotic. But more and more people began to request for the army to be dispatched to retrieve Marquis Dawson and the released captives. Wales felt that he had understood the whole story. The reason why his father hadn't returned for so long was because he had been detained. At this moment, the glory of the Dawson clan made him change his cowardly personality. He stood up and shouted loudly, asking everyone to go rescue Marquis Dawson. Amidst the chaos and anxiety, the Dawson clan finally had a unified voice. Although this voice might not lead them to a bright future, at this moment, the confused people needed a direction. No matter where it led them, it was better than going around in circles in the dark. Thus, a loud bugle sounded in the Dawson clan camp. That was the signal to attack. Marquis Dawson, who heard the sound, froze on the spot. He was dumbfounded. He was about to convince Marquis Menham to take in the captives and stabilize the situation. But now, with the sound of the bugle, the entire dwarven camp was boiling. Marquis Menham's gaze became as sharp as a viper's. Fran Dawson, what are you doing? This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Marquis Dawson was sweating profusely as he explained, Ma'am, those idiots must have thought that something happened to me after I left for so long. They were impulsive and did something stupid. But I hope you understand that I have no intention of going against you. Our two families can't go against each other. This will only benefit the house of St. Hilda. Please let me go. I'll pacify those troublemakers. Let you go? Markham Menham sneered, You've been playing tricks on me time and time again. Do you think I'm a fool? Marquis Dawson was sweating profusely. His tone had a hint of pleading. Markham, if you detain me here, it will only make the misunderstanding bigger and the conflict more serious. Misunderstanding? Marquis Menham's gaze was cold. When you lied to me last night, there was no trust between us. Now, Austere Castle released the captives of the Dawson family for no reason, and these captives attacked my army. Do you think you can continue to deceive me? Marquis Dawson was taken aback and asked, How did I lie to you last night? Marquis Menham had lost his patience with Marquis Dawson. He smiled coldly and said to his subordinates, Treat Marquis Dawson well. Treat Marquis Dawson well. Without my orders, no one is allowed to see him. A group of guards immediately surrounded Marquis Dawson. Markham, listen to my explanation. This is a plot by the house of St. Hilda. Don't fall for it. Marquis Dawson was still shouting, but Marquis Menham had already left without looking back. Chapter 279. The soft light from the crystal chandelier illuminated the main hall of the church. Falco stepped on the thick, light yellow wool carpet and slowly walked into the church. It was already late at night, and there was only an old priest on night duty in the church. How can I help you? I'm looking for Archbishop Ajani. The old priest frowned and said, Sorry, it's too late today. The Archbishop is already resting. You can come tomorrow. Count Falco. At this moment, the emeritus bishop suddenly appeared in the church and beckoned to Falco. Please follow me. Falco smiled apologetically at the old priest and followed the emeritus bishop to the back of the church. During this diplomatic trip to Winter City, his father, Marquis Dawson, had asked him to find a way to meet Archbishop Ajani. Even though Wales, that unreliable fellow, often did stupid things, he still managed to contact the church leader of the northern frontier. Now that the peace talks with the house of St. Hilda had reached a stalemate, the Dawson family was prepared to try the church. Perhaps there would be some unexpected surprises. Knock, knock, knock. The emeritus bishop lightly knocked on the door, and a languid voice came from inside. Come in. Count Falco, please. The emeritus bishop smiled and gestured with his hand. Thank you, Your Eminence. Falco smiled at the emeritus bishop and pushed the door open. This room was probably the archbishop's private parlor. Even though the decorations were not luxurious, they were rather exquisite. Falco had just entered when he saw Archbishop Ajani's back. She was standing quietly in front of the window, overlooking the dark night sky. Perhaps because it was not a public occasion, the archbishop did not wear a priest's robe tonight. Instead, she wore a purple dress. The dark color of the dress formed a strong contrast with her white skin, accentuating her otherworldly temperament. She was like a descending angel. On the windowsill beside Ajani, there was a crystal vase half filled with water. There was a bunch of purple irises in the water, matching the color of Ajani's dress. The night breeze outside the window blew the petals of the irises, spreading an intoxicating fragrance into the room. "Good evening, Count Falco." Ajani did not turn around. She only lowered her head and fiddled with the petals of the iris flower. Just the sight of his back was enough to make Falco's heart race and his mouth dry up. He finally understood why his younger brother was so obsessed with this woman. "Good evening, Your Excellency. I hope I didn't disturb your rest." Ajani turned to the side and pointed at a small round table in the room. She said softly, "Don't be so nervous. Sit down and drink something." Falco thanked him and sat down at the table. He picked up his teacup and took a sip. Falco's spirit was slightly shaken by the bitter taste. He saw Akani staring out of the window in a daze and spoke again. "Your Excellency, I've come to find you this time mainly to thank you on behalf of my father for the news you delivered last time. Even though Marquis Minam wasn't tricked by the House of St. Hilda, the Dawson family still thanks you for your kind reminder." "Really? The relationship between the Menham clan and the Dawson clan really surprises me." Because Ajani's back was facing Falco, he couldn't see her expression. He nodded with a smile. "Don't worry, we dwarves have been fighting for this common goal for 1,000 years. It's not something that can be easily sowed discord between us." At this moment, a faint clamor came from outside the window. Ajani's expression became very interesting. Even though Falco was curious about the clamor, he couldn't go to the window to take a look. That would be too impolite. He could only suppress his curiosity and continue. "Your Excellency, the negotiations with the House of St. Hilda have reached a stalemate. So I was wondering if you could exert some pressure on the House of St. Hilda to facilitate this negotiation. In return, the Dawson family is willing to support your actions on the northern frontier, including, cough cough, the issue of the inheritance of the Dukes of the North." Hearing this, Ajani finally turned around. She had a faint smile on her delicate oval face, and her limpid eyes were fixated on Count Falco. Her gaze was filled with charm. Falco only felt a nameless flame rising in his lower abdomen, making his whole body hot and dry. He was almost unable to control himself. "Count Falco, what do you think my position on the issue of the inheritance of the Dukes of the North is?" Ajani's languid and slightly hoarse voice was like a swan feather, constantly stirring Falco's restless heart. Falco's breathing was heavy, his face flushed. His eyes were fixed on Ajani, as if he wanted to use his gaze to completely melt her. "You what?" With a slight twist of her right wrist, a purple whip flew out and lashed Count Falco's shoulder with a swoosh. Falco screamed miserably. He didn't understand why Ajani suddenly turned hostile, but what was more shocking was that he, a rank 4 warrior, couldn't evade the attack of a priest. One had to know that a priest was a support class and wasn't proficient in combat. Moreover, that whip wasn't fast. If it was under normal circumstances, Falco felt that he could completely evade it. But now, he felt as if his legs were filled with lead. His whole body felt like it was on fire, and his brain was filled with all kinds of chaotic thoughts. He couldn't keep calm. "Count Falco, what are you trying to say?" The smile on Ajani's face grew sweeter and sweeter. Her voice was as gentle as a wife greeting her husband who had just returned home. But at the same time, the whip in her hand lashed out mercilessly and Count Falco fell to the ground. There was a problem with the tea. Falco finally reacted, but his consciousness was already on the verge of collapse. In his eyes, Ajani had completely turned from an angel into a demon, although he didn't know why she did this. The noise outside the window grew louder and louder. At the same time, bursts of fire gradually lit up, dispelling the darkness that enveloped the land. Ajani took one last look at the commotion outside the city, put away her whip, and strolled towards the door. At the door, she placed one hand on the door handle, but turned her head to look at Falco, who was struggling on the ground, as if she was expecting something. A moment later, Count Falco finally raised his head and let out an unusual roar. His eyes had already turned scarlet, as if he had completely lost his mind. When he saw Ajani at the door, he immediately jumped up from the ground and pounced. Ajani's lips curled into a smug sneer. She immediately tore open the sleeves of her dress, revealing her white and tender arms. At the same time, she opened the door and rushed out, wailing mournfully. "Count Falco! What are you doing? Count Falco, Count Falco." Count Anka knocked on the door for a long time, but there was no response. An alarmed patrolling guard walked over and said, "Count Falco went out." "Do you know where he went?" "Sorry, I don't know either." Count Anka was anxious, and he did not know what to do. He was awakened by the noise outside the city. Winter City was built on a mountain, and the Lion's Roar Fortress was at the peak of the mountain. Looking down, he could see the fire in the dwarf camp outside the city. Count Anka did not know what was going on, but he guessed that it was probably not something good. Seeing that Count Falco was not around, Count Anka walked to the main fortress alone. "Are Miss Vera and Viscount Angli resting?" The guard glanced at Count Anka and motioned for him to enter. Count Anka quickly pushed open the heavy door, and the first thing he saw was Colin and Vera in the hall. "Count Anka, can't you sleep either?" Colin did not seem surprised by Count Anka's arrival. He turned around and greeted him with a smile. However, Count Anka's heart sank because he saw Colin putting on his armor with Vera's help. "Viscount Angli, what are you going to do?" Count Anka asked in a hoarse voice. Colin patted the blade of judgment at his waist and smiled. "There are some people outside the city who are not obedient. It is already so late, and they are still making a ruckus. I have to teach them a lesson." Count Anka's forehead was covered in cold sweat, and he said with difficulty, "Lord Viscounts, what is going on outside? Why don't you come with me and take a look? Then you'll know." Colin had already put on his armor, and he kissed Vera's forehead gently before inviting Count Anka. However, Count Anka had a bad premonition, and he said anxiously, "Lord Viscounts, are you going to start a war?" Colin's face turned cold, and he said firmly, "The war has already begun the moment you besieged the city." Count Anka wanted to explain, but Colin had already walked out. "Miss Vera, is the House of St. Hilda really going to fight the dwarves to the death?" Count Anka did not give up, and he shouted at Vera. However, Vera ignored him and held Colin's arm as they walked out together. Count Anka was stunned for a long time, and his expression changed rapidly. Finally, he gritted his teeth and followed after them. Chapter 280. Chi. Holmoen pulled his long sword out of the enemy's chest, and hot blood splattered all over his face. Hoo! He panted heavily, and the cramps in his stomach caused by hunger made him unable to straighten his back. It was unknown if it was blood or sweat, but Holmoen's vision was blurred, and he couldn't see the situation in front of him. This battle came too suddenly and too inexplicably. Holmoen thought that he could escape the fate of being a captive, but what awaited him wasn't an ally's acceptance, but an attack. He couldn't figure out why the Menham family wanted to kill them. But he was a nameless soldier who didn't understand the situation and was powerless to change the situation. When the enemy surged forward like a flood, he had no choice but to draw his long sword and resist. Holmoen didn't have much combat power due to malnutrition during his captivity. His hands were as heavy as lead, and he couldn't lift them. Under the cover of the night, Holmoen didn't know the situation on the battlefield. He only knew that his comrades were falling, and even their leader was killed. If General Tumu wasn't at the front line like a god of war, the released dwarven captives would have collapsed. But now they were on the verge of collapse. At this moment, Holmoen heard a faint sound behind him. He turned his head and saw the gates of chilly winter open again. A fire dragon made up of numerous torches emerged from the gates. The Golden Lion Legion was here. Holmoen's heart twitched. He had an ominous premonition that this would be an unforgettable night for the dwarves. The Golden Lion Legion wasn't in a hurry to join the battle. Instead, they leaned against the city walls and formed an orderly formation. It was as though they were waiting for the dwarves to emerge victorious. The commotion made the dwarves realize that something was amiss. The Menham family army immediately sounded the bugle call for retreat. But at this moment, the Dawson clan's army continued to chase after them, because they wanted to rescue Marquis Dawson. The dwarven prisoners released from chilly winter collapsed to the ground as though they were deflated. They were unable to move. In this battle, they were the ones who suffered the heaviest casualties. Of the more than 15,000 captives, less than half of the original number were still breathing. It was only after the Menham family's army had retreated that the Golden Lion Legion slowly approached. Put down your weapons, kneel and surrender. Put down your weapons, kneel and surrender. Upon hearing such a voice, Holmeson could no longer muster up any thoughts of resistance. He immediately threw away the long saber in his hand and knelt on the ground obediently. At the same time, he sighed. What the hell? How did he become a captive right after being released? The faint light of dawn gradually tore apart the darkness and gave light to the earth once again. The armies of the Dawson family and the Menham family temporarily stopped fighting and entered a tense standoff. In fact, Marquis Menam regretted his decision the moment he saw the Golden Lion Legion leave the city. Although he didn't want to admit it, he understood that he had been fooled. Thus, he led his army away from Cold Winter City and slowly retreated. At the same time, he sent an envoy to the Dawson family's army to request for reconciliation. At this moment, the commander of the Dawson clan's army, Wales Dawson, immediately made a request. The only possibility for reconciliation was for the Menham clan to immediately release Marquis Dawson and compensate the Dawson clan for their losses. However, at this moment, Marquis Menam had other thoughts. He was clear that after a night of chaotic battle, the relationship between the Dawson family and the Menham family was completely broken. Even if he followed Wales' request to release Marquis Dawson and compensate the Dawson clan for their losses, the relationship between the two families couldn't be restored. The seed of distrust had been deeply planted, and it would be extremely difficult to eliminate it. Once the two dwarven families couldn't work together, they wouldn't be able to gain the upper hand against the House of St. Hilda. After a night of chaotic battle, the exhausted dwarven allied army might not be a match for the Golden Lion Legion. At this moment, Marquis Menam was thinking of how to resolve the situation. The peace terms proposed by the House of St. Hilda weren't unacceptable to him. Marquis Dawson seemed to have noticed something from Marquis Menam's gloomy expression. Menam immediately said, "If you want to hand me over in exchange for the forgiveness of the House of St. Hilda, you're courting death." Marquis Menam's heart skipped a beat, and he asked in a deep voice, "Why?" Marquis Dawson sneered, "You still don't understand? The House of St. Hilda didn't intend to negotiate with us from the start. They can't tolerate the dwarves establishing an independent nation on the northern frontier. Therefore, they've been trying to sow discord between us, one after another. If you hand me over and even work with the Golden Lion Legion to defeat the Dawson family, do you think the House of St. Hilda will let the Menham family off? They'll definitely think of a way to deal with the Menham family. When the time comes, without the help of the Dawson family, do you think the Menham family can face the House of St. Hilda alone?" Marquis Menam immediately fell into silence. Marquis Dawson saw this and immediately struck while the iron was hot. Therefore, the Dawson family and the Menham family are bound together for good or ill. Only if the two families work together can the dwarves gain a foothold on the northern frontier. But Marquis Menam didn't immediately agree. Instead, he frowned and asked, "Marquis Dawson, do you think I can still trust you after last night's incident?" Marquis Dawson took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I can promise that if you let me go, I'll immediately withdraw my army and won't allow them to attack you. Moreover, I can send Falco to your side." Marquis Menam's gaze froze, and he was slightly moved. He knew that Count Falco was Marquis Dawson's designated successor. This action was more binding than a simple verbal promise. But then he frowned again. Isn't Count Falco in chilly Winter City? He should be detained by the House of St. Hilda. How are you going to hand him over to me? Marquis Dawson's eyes rolled as he immediately said, "Then Wales will do. If you let me go, I'll hand Wales over to you as a hostage." Marquis Menam laughed and shook his head as he said, Do you think I'm stupid? You don't care about whales at all. Even if I kill him, you won't feel any heartache. Marquis Dawson said helplessly, Then what do you want? Marquis Menam was deep in thought. But at this moment, the Golden Lion Legion had caught up and was pointing their weapons at the Menham family. On the other side, the Oman family's army had also arrived. Their target was the Dawson family's army, but the Oman family's army was only in formation and didn't have any intention of attacking. It was as though they were guarding against the Dawson family and didn't want them to act rashly. The Golden Lion Legion had already sounded the bugle horn to attack. Seeing this, Marquis Menam immediately ordered his army to prepare for battle. At the same time, he looked coldly at Marquis Dawson and mocked him. You said that you didn't have any secret contact with the House of St. Hilda. Then why did the Golden Lion Legion attack my army and not yours? Marquis Dawson sighed and seemed disheartened as he said, If you're bewitched by the House of St. Hilda, then there's no need for us to continue working together. The dream of the dwarves establishing a nation, perhaps it's just like what Marquis Garcia said. It's just a joke. Marquis Dawson closed his eyes in shame, as though he wasn't willing to speak anymore. Marquis Menam's expression was uncertain, but with the enemy in front of him, he didn't have much time to think. He could only cast aside all distracting thoughts and focus on the Golden Lion Legion's attack. Soon, the vanguards of the two armies clashed. The sounds of battle instantly filled the wilderness. Chapter 281. Boom. The two armies that were surging forward finally collided with each other unavoidably. Fierce sounds of metal clashing and tragic howls intertwined in an instant. Bright flowers of blood bloomed with a loud bang, and many soldiers instantly howled and fell to the ground. In a head-on collision without any tricks, strength determined everything. The Golden Lion Legion was still maintaining a strict square charging formation. The first row of infantrymen raised their sturdy giant shields and connected them to form a cold shield wall, firmly blocking the surging dwarves outside the shield wall. On the other hand, the second and third rows of infantrymen used the spears in their hands to continuously thrust through the gaps between the shields, stabbing down the dwarves outside the shield wall row by row. Bang. A dwarf soldier was pushed forward by the crowd and slammed into the giant shield of the Golden Lion Legion. The sharp spikes on the surface of the shield instantly left a dozen huge bloody holes in his body. The dwarf soldier held the shield with both hands and roared as he struggled to pull his body out of the shield. However, when he lowered his head, he saw more than 10 streams of blood spurting out from his body. The fear of death instantly enveloped him, and shrill screams continuously came from his mouth. Bang. Another dwarf soldier smashed the giant shield with his hammer, making a deafening sound. However, it did not break the giant shield, only leaving a small, harmless dent on it. Whoosh whoosh. Two sharp spears pierced through the gaps on both sides of the shield. With a flash of cold light, the spears pierced into the dwarf soldier's lower abdomen and came out from his back. Dark red blood slowly dripped down along the blade of the spears. Behind him, a fearless dwarf soldier stepped on his companion's shoulder and leaped onto the giant shield. He raised the sharp sword in his hand high and laughed wildly as he slashed at the human soldier hiding behind the giant shield. However, before the steel saber in his hand could strike down, a cold spear had already pierced out like a poisonous snake. Teeth. The sharp edge of the spear pierced through the chest of the dwarf soldier, nailing him firmly in the air. A shrill howl came from the dwarf's mouth, and as his blood spurted out, the vitality of his youth flowed out of his body like a tide. Get out of my way! A dwarf officer rushed to the front of the giant shield and smashed the long-handled giant hammer in his hand down. Boom. Amidst the violent impact, a sturdy steel shield was instantly torn apart, unable to block the might of the dwarf's hammer. The human soldier hiding behind the shield was shocked as if he had been struck by lightning. Blood flowed out of his orifices and he fell to the ground, his body twitching. However, almost as soon as this person fell to the ground, another human soldier carrying a giant shield came up to fill the gap that the dwarf had just smashed open, so that the formation of the vanguard was still intact. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Asterisk 3 sharp spears stabbed out from 3 different angles at the same time, the blades flashing with cold light aimed at the dwarf officer. Asterisk clang clang. Asterisk the dwarf officer tried his best to block and knocked away 2 spears, but he could no longer stop the last spear from piercing his right arm. In the midst of the splashing blood, the dwarf officer roared and smashed the handle of the spear that had pierced through his arm with his hammer. However, another spear pierced through the gap of the shield wall and went straight for his head. The dwarf officer felt a chill in his heart. He could only helplessly take a few steps back and hide in the rear of the army. But at this moment, the formation of the dwarf army was already showing signs of collapsing. The dwarves were no match for the Golden Lion Legion, whether it was the quality of their soldiers or their training equipment. Needless to say, they had just experienced a chaotic battle last night and were already exhausted. How could they be a match for the Golden Lion Legion? Under the cold-blooded and orderly assassination of the Golden Lion Army, the dwarf vanguard fell row by row, and their formation gradually fell apart. But the formation of the Golden Lion Army was still stable. The foot soldiers at the front raised their shields and began to slowly advance. The spears behind the shields continued to shoot out like venomous snakes, continuing to devour the lives of the dwarf soldiers. At the rear of the Golden Lion Army, Count Anka's face was pale, and cold sweat broke out all over his body. Viscount Angley, the Menham family is willing to negotiate. Please withdraw your troops immediately. Colin looked at the situation in front of him and said without turning his head, Count Anka, you can decide when the war begins, but when it ends is not up to you. Count Anka's mouth was full of bitterness. He could only lower his stance and say, Viscount Angley, please state your conditions. As long as the Menham family can do it, I will agree. Colin glanced at him and said with a smile, I want you to scram from the northern frontier. Can I do that? The corners of Count Anka's eyes twitched. He forced a smile and said, Viscount Angley, the Menham family has already reached an agreement with many lords of the northern frontier to exchange territories. Aren't you forcing us to go back on these agreements? Colin shrugged and shook his head. Then there's nothing to talk about. Let's continue fighting. Let me see if the Menham family has the right to establish a foothold on the northern frontier. Viscount Angley, why do you have to do this? There will always be casualties when 2 armies fight. Can you bear to see the Golden Lion Army suffer heavy losses? Suffer heavy losses? Colin smiled disdainfully. Does the Menham family have the ability to do so? Count Anka was so agitated that his face turned red. His tone became impolite. Viscount Angley, have you not heard of the Menham family's heavy armored infantry? I have. Moreover, I would like to see it with my own eyes. Colin had a nonchalant look on his face, but then his eyes focused. He smiled and pointed in the direction of the battlefield. Heh, the opportunity is here. Count Anka hurriedly turned to look in front of him. He saw a flood of red steel emerging from the Menham family's formation. It was as if lava was gushing out, surging toward the front lines of the battlefield. That was the 8,000 heavy-armored infantry that the Menham family was most proud of. Count Anka took a deep breath. He knew that his father had already thrown all of his family's resources into the battlefield. It looked like he was prepared to fight to the death. Thus, he stopped trying to persuade him. He was prepared to let Colin experience the Menham family's strength and make him suffer a little. This way, perhaps the House of St. Hilda would be willing to return to the negotiation table. It had to be said that the heavy-armored Dwarven infantry army's battle prowess was indeed shocking. The moment they joined the battle, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. The Golden Lion Army's giant shield and spear formations seemed to have collided with a towering mountain. Their forward momentum was immediately suppressed. The sharp spears were unable to pose a threat to the heavy-armored infantry. They could only let them shout in unison and wave their warhammers as they pushed back. Count Anka was excited, and a smug smile appeared on his face. However, when he turned to look at Colin, he did not find any trace of panic on his face. Count Anka thought that Colin was only pretending to be calm and felt disdain in his heart. He turned his gaze back to the battlefield, prepared to persuade him when the Golden Lion Army's formation completely crumbled. At that time, Colin's attitude would definitely not be as unyielding as before. However, after observing for a while, Count Anka realized to his surprise that even though the Golden Lion Army's formation was continuously retreating, it was still orderly and showed no signs of collapsing. As the heavy-armored dwarven infantry continued to press forward, the distance between them and the army behind them had unknowingly increased. At this moment, a distant bugle call suddenly sounded from behind the dwarven army. Following that, faint shouts could be heard. At this moment, the dwarves still did not know what was happening, but the shouts were getting closer and closer. At the same time, the dense sound of horse hooves could be heard. It was as if countless giants were beating on the ground, causing the entire field to tremble. Count Anka's heart skipped a beat. Looking into the distance, he saw a thin black line appear on the field behind the Menham family. This black line grew larger and wider until it finally formed a black sea that spread toward the battlefield. In this black sea, the Black Lion flag and the Angeli family's roaring White Bear flag fluttered in the wind. They surged forward like giant waves in a tropical storm, or like a flood that had broken through a dam. Everywhere they went, everything was drowned by this black flood. It was a chilling sight. Black cavalry? Count Anka's voice changed. He immediately realized that this was a trap set up by Colin. At that moment, the Menham family's most elite heavy-armored infantry regiment was already entangled with the Golden Lion Legion. They were completely separated from the main army at the rear. The Shadow Guards seized this perfect opportunity and suddenly charged out from the rear. They were like dragons emerging from the water as they attacked the core of the Menham family's formation. It's over. Even though the Black Cavalry had yet to arrive, Count Anka could already foresee what would happen next. And this foresight made him feel as if he had fallen into an icy cavern. Thus, he no longer dared to hesitate. He immediately turned to Colin and begged for mercy. "Viscount Angley, we admit defeat. As long as you are willing to stop the war, the Menham family will immediately withdraw from the northern frontier. The matter of the dwarves establishing a kingdom will never be mentioned again." Colin chuckled and said coldly, "I've already told you this before. I've already said that you can decide when this war will begin, but when it will end, you'll have to ask for my opinion." "Then what is your opinion?" Colin did not reply. Instead, a bloodthirsty smile appeared on his face. Boom! In an instant, the Black Cavalry had already charged into the rear of the Menham family's army like a violent wave. Blood splattered everywhere, and dismembered corpses flew everywhere. Chapter 282. Wales and the officers of the Dawson family could only watch helplessly as the Black Cavalry broke through the Menham family's central army formation like wolves and tigers. They couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for the loss of the rabbit. The Menham family was finished. That was the only thing they could agree on. Even though the Golden Lion Legion was actually at a disadvantage on the battlefield and was forced to retreat step by the heavy infantry regiment, when the Black Cavalry suddenly attacked from the rear and cut down the commander's flag, the Menham family's elite vanguard inevitably fell into chaos. Even if the vanguard wanted to retreat, it would be too late. Moreover, the Golden Lion Legion wouldn't let them go so easily. Moreover, once the central army and rear army collapsed, the Menham family's army would become a headless snake. Without a unified command, they could only fight on their own and would be defeated one by one. "Young master, should we go and support them?" a Dawson family officer asked Wales. Wales resisted the urge to curse and glared fiercely at the person who asked the question, but didn't answer. "Support my ass." The Dawson family had just fought a life-and-death battle with the Menham family. How could they go and support them now? Moreover, the Oman family was eyeing them covetously. Wales was almost certain that if they dared to act rashly, the Oman family would definitely launch a large-scale attack. Seeing the Menham family's miserable state, Wales didn't want the Dawson family to follow in their footsteps. "Let's just retreat," Wales suggested hesitantly. But such a shameful suggestion made the officers of the Dawson family lower their heads. Everyone's reaction made Wales realize that he had said something stupid. What was the use of retreating now? Let's not talk about whether they could retreat or not. Even if they did, what was the use? Once the House of St. Hilda pacified the chaos at the northern frontier, wouldn't they have time to deal with the Dawson family? At this moment, the officers were looking forward to Marquis Dawson's safe return. Even if Marquis Dawson wasn't there, Count Falco was. It was better than letting this random Wales come up with ideas. I think it's better to ask for peace from the House of St. Hilda, an officer suggested in a muffled voice. Yes. We should continue the peace talks. Continue the peace talks. Wales seemed to be grabbing onto a life-saving straw as he kept shouting. But before Wales could send out an emissary to seek peace, an emissary from Cold Winter City arrived at the Dawson clan's camp. However, this messenger was wearing a priest's robe. While the officers were bewildered, Wales was overjoyed. He grasped the priest's hand and asked urgently, "What's the matter? Did the archbishop send you here?" The priest smiled and nodded, then pulled his hand out without a trace. "Praise the God of light." Wales was so emotional that he sounded like he was about to cry. I knew the archbishop wouldn't give up on her most devout believer. "Your Excellency Wales, the archbishop is willing to help the Dawson family reach a settlement with the House of St. Hilda. However, she needs you to show some sincerity. Otherwise, she won't be able to speak on your behalf." "What sincerity?" "As long as our Dawson clan is able to accomplish it, please give us your orders." "It's actually very simple." The priest chuckled and said, "The Menham family brazenly invaded the northern frontier and has been listed as an enemy that must be killed by the House of St. Hilda. If you can lead an army to assist in attacking the Menham family, then the House of St. Hilda will consider forgiving the Dawson family for their previous betrayal." Wales was a little hesitant. It wasn't that he didn't want to attack the Menham family. After all, the two families had already shed all pretense of cordiality and had even fought last night. However, Marquis Dawson was still in their hands. Wales was worried that his attack would cause the Menham family to act in desperation and kill his father. After voicing his doubts, the priest smiled mysteriously and moved closer to Wales, whispering to him, "Don't worry." He whispered, "Your Excellency Wales, do you want to inherit the Dawson family's title?" Wales' gaze froze and his heart skipped a few beats. He asked evasively, "What do you mean?" "His Excellency the Archbishop told me to tell you that he can help you get rid of Count Falco. As for your father, Marquis Dawson, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but the House of St. Hilda will definitely not let him off for his previous betrayal of Marquis Garcia. Therefore, even if he can survive from the Menham family, he will definitely not be able to escape the judgment of the House of St. Hilda. Then, do you really want the Dawson family to be implicated along with him?" Wales' heart was thumping. He really wanted to ask what happened to his brother, Count Falco, but he didn't dare to do so when the words reached his mouth. After pondering for a long time, he finally raised his head again. His eyes were now filled with ambition. "All right, I'm willing to listen to the Archbishop's suggestion. I also hope that the Archbishop can help the Dawson family fight for a decent ending." The mage chuckled and nodded, "Of course. The Archbishop will never give up on his devout believers." After receiving the Archbishop's promise, Wales immediately felt that he had a backer. His dispirited state was swept away as he immediately reorganized his army and began to attack the Menham family's left flank. At this moment, the Menham family's army was already on the verge of collapse. The Golden Lion Legion had already pressed forward from the front, while the Black Cavalry attacked from the back. Galloping unhindered, they continuously cut up the Menham family's army, making it impossible for them to regroup. The addition of the Dawson family was the last straw that broke the camel's back. More and more Menham family soldiers threw away their weapons in the face of cruel reality and chose to surrender. Of course, the Menham family didn't lack brave warriors who didn't fear death. But their stubborn resistance was like moths to a flame in the face of such a magnificent situation. Apart from adding a bit of heroism and sorrow, there was no other use. The moment Marquis Menham saw the appearance of the Black Cavalry, he already knew that this battle boded ill rather than well. When the Dawson family's army turned against him, he fell into complete despair. The furious Marquis Menham immediately drew his sword from his waist and turned around to stab at Marquis Dawson. Marquis Dawson faced the incoming sword and didn't dodge. Instead, a look of relief appeared on his face. Chi. The long sword pierced through his chest. Marky Dawson looked at his dwarven compatriot in front of him, his lips curling into a sneer as he hissed, "I'll be waiting for you in heaven." This attitude caused the already furious Marquis Menham to fall into madness. He roared as he chopped off Marky Dawson's head and chopped his corpse into 7 or 8 pieces before stopping. Afterwards, Marquis Menham raised the bloody head and ordered, "White flag. Raise the white flag and surrender." The afternoon sun was very strong, shining on the blood-stained ground. Flocks of vultures circled in the air, ready to dive down and feast at any time. "Father!" When Marquis Menham was escorted in front of Colin, Count Ankh immediately rushed forward. Marquis Menham's eyes were empty and he ignored his son who ran over. He just knelt in front of Vera and Colin and placed Marquis Dawson's head in front of him. After that, he didn't say a word as he waited quietly for his sentence. Vera turned around and looked at Colin. Obviously, she didn't know how to deal with Marquis Menham. Colin didn't hold back either. He immediately stepped forward and announced his sentence. "Marquis Menham, you and your family are not welcome at the northern frontier. Therefore, after this battle, please return to the Flaming Flame territory immediately. Unless you have the permission of the House of St. Hilda, you are not allowed to set foot on the northern frontier again. In order to compensate for the harm your family has caused to the people of the northern frontier, your family's army will remain in the northern frontier as slaves. They will work for the northern frontier until they die. At the same time, the Menham family will have to pay the House of St. Hilda a total of 8 million gold coins as war reparations. The reparations will be paid off over 5 years. Are you willing to accept these conditions?" Marquis Menham's heart was bleeding, but he knew that there was no room for negotiation. If this had happened before the battle, he might have been able to ask for the entire army to retreat from the northern frontier. However, now he would be lucky if he could keep the Menham family alive. Of course, he also knew that Colin didn't kill him because he wanted to save the face of the royal family. The Menham family had lost all of their army and they were burdened with heavy debts. Naturally, they wouldn't be able to threaten the House of St. Hilda anymore. As time passed, they would slowly sink and never regain their former glory. The dream of the dwarves establishing their own country would also become an unattainable dream. Marquis Menham couldn't help but feel sad when he thought of this. "I am willing to accept." At this time, Colin finally revealed a satisfied smile. Not far away, Wales Dawson was accompanied by a priest as he walked towards Colin. When Wales saw his father's head, his eyes narrowed slightly, but the expression on his face was very strange. There was sadness and fear on his face, but there was also joy and joy. "Dear Miss Vera, dear Viscount Angley, your most loyal servant, the Dawson family, begs for your forgiveness." Looking at Wales, who was crawling on the ground, and then looking at the priest beside him, Colin chuckled as if he had understood something. Colin rubbed his chin as he smiled at Wales. "Wales, your attitude of begging for forgiveness doesn't seem to be sincere enough." Hearing that, Wales immediately understood and nodded. He then crawled to Vera on all fours and kissed her toes while saying loudly, "I'm sorry, Vera. Dear Miss Vera, the Dawson family begs for your forgiveness." Colin looked at the second son of the Dawson family who had no dignity at all and smiled disdainfully. He then nodded at Vera. Vera nodded coldly and accepted the other party's apology. Wales was relieved and he continued to praise the kindness of the House of St. Hilda loudly. His posture was so ugly that it was simply unbearable to look at. Colin smiled as he looked at the clown's performance. He began to think about how to deal with the Dawson family. Of course, he wouldn't let them go so easily. However, looking at Wales' appearance, it seemed like the Dawson family wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. At this point, the rebellion on the northern frontier had finally come to an end. Chapter 283. Merciful God of Light, we are here today to offer our prayers to the Duke of St. Hilda. He has finished his journey in this world and has finally returned to the embrace of our Lord. Archbishop Ajani's pious voice echoed in the quiet and solemn tomb. The morning sun shone through the glass dome, sprinkling colorful light in the tomb. This was one of the most sacred places in the Lion's Roar Castle, where the remains of the Duke of St. Hilda were buried. Today, a new member would be welcomed here. In fact, the funeral of the Duke of St. Hilda was held in a hurry. The northern frontier had just calmed down from the turmoil, and the new dukes of the north had yet to officially inherit the title of duke. The nobles and civilians had yet to be appeased, but Colin still asked Archbishop Ajani to conduct the funeral for the Duke of St. Hilda. After all, Colin felt uneasy as long as the body of the Duke was not buried. He always felt that something might happen, and the situation that had just been stabilized would become turbulent again. Moreover, Colin was also prepared to take this opportunity to summon all the lords of the northern frontier to Winter City and let them know that the Duke had made Vera the first heir in his will. Of course, in order for Vera to officially become one of the Dukes of the North, she still needed to be conferred by Emperor Reinhard. However, now that she had the Duke of St. Hilda's will, Vera had a decisive advantage. Moreover, Scholar Dowen had already prepared a plan to deal with Emperor Reinhard and the Senate. Come from the dust, return to the dust. May your soul rest in peace in the Lord's temple. After Ajani finished reciting the prayer, 4 knights of the House of St. Hilda stepped forward, slowly lifted the Duke's coffin, and walked towards the center of the tomb. As he was a paladin, the Duke of St. Hilda was qualified to be buried in the centermost shrine of the tomb. After the coffin was slowly pushed into the shrine, Vera and Joyce stepped forward and sprinkled a handful of soil on it. At this point, the funeral was over. Colin heaved a sigh of relief. Although he had a tacit understanding with Archbishop Ajani beforehand, Colin could only be sure that she would not go back on her words after the funeral. Of course, there were conditions for Ajani's cooperation. Her condition was that the House of St. Hilda would no longer pursue the Dawson family's betrayal. Colin could guess what the other party wanted to do. Marquis Dawson was dead, and his eldest son, Count Falco, was caught trying to blaspheme Archbishop Ajani and was arrested by the church. In Colin's eyes, this was clearly a setup. No matter how lustful Count Falco was, he would never attempt to violate Ajani in the church. Akani's goal should be to let Wales inherit the Dawson family's title. This Wales was clearly a fanatic of Akane's, as well as a super bootlicka. This way, Akane would indirectly control the Dawson family. Of course, Colin was very unhappy with this act of poaching the northern frontier, but because he needed to cooperate with the church, he could only pinch his nose and tolerate Ajani's little tricks. In fact, forgiving the Dawson family now was a good thing for the House of St. Hilda. Because what the northern frontier needed the most now was stability. This storm of rebellion caused by the St. Thean family had a wide range of implications. Some people directly participated in the rebellion, some remained neutral, and some had other intentions of colluding with outsiders. In short, what the nobles in the northern frontier were most worried about was whether the House of St. Hilda would settle the score after the event. Forgiving the Dawson family would dispel everyone's concerns. Even the Dawson family, who directly participated in the rebellion, was forgiven. Would the House of St. Hilda continue to pursue the mistakes of other families? Of course, in Colin's eyes, this was only a temporary measure. The northern region was too weak now and could not afford another upheaval. Therefore, he did not intend to start another war. However, after a period of rest and recuperation, and after the northern frontier recovered, he would definitely clean up the northern frontier. For example, the Dawson family or the Morrison family. Thinking of this, Colin found the figure of Earl Morrison in the crowd of people who came to watch the ceremony. The young Earl's expression was as usual, and there was nothing unusual about him except for the grief that should be there. However, Colin knew that the theft of the Duke's body was most likely the work of this family. Originally, Colin had already prepared a plan to deal with the other party's sudden attack at the funeral, but he did not expect that Earl Morrison did not do anything at all. What was going on? Then what did they want to do by stealing the Duke of St. Hilda's body? Colin had no choice but to suppress his doubts in the bottom of his heart. He held Vera's hand and walked out of the tomb together. Behind them, a group of nobles from the northern frontier also came out one after another. Miss Vera. Vera stopped in her tracks, only to see Count Morrison catching up to her. Viscount Angley. Earl Morrison nodded to Colin again. Colin smiled and did not speak, but he was constantly guessing what the other party wanted to do. "Earl Morrison, what can I do for you?" Vera asked softly. "It's like this?" Earl Morrison seemed to be a little embarrassed. "I have admired Miss Nina for a long time, so I would like to ask Miss Vera to marry her to me." Sure enough, Colin's heart skipped a beat. Earl Morrison was really here to propose. But he was too anxious. The Duke of St. Hilda had just been buried, and it was too rash of him to propose a marriage alliance right away. Moreover, Vera had not officially inherited the title of Duke yet. Strictly speaking, she was not qualified to marry Nina to Earl Morrison. "I'm sorry, Earl Morrison." Vera frowned and said, "I am not the master of the Lion's Roar fort yet, and I cannot influence Cousin Nina's marriage." Earl Morrison quickly apologized and said, "Of course, I understand. So, I am just expressing my feelings to you this time. It will not be too late to arrange a marriage alliance after you inherit the title of Duke." "Well, I will think about it, and I will also ask for Cousin Nina's opinion." Vera did not directly agree. However, Earl Morrison did not know if he misunderstood Vera's meaning or if he was very confident in himself, but he thanked her again, and then left with satisfaction. "Colin, do you think I should marry Cousin Nina to Earl Morrison?" Vera asked hesitantly. "You can ask Nina's opinion first." Colin smiled and said, "Moreover, you are not in a hurry. It will not be too late to talk about it after you officially inherit the title of Duke." Vera nodded. "Then, when are we leaving for Imperial Dragon City?" Vera officially inherited the title of Duke, and she needed to go to Imperial Dragon City to accept the Emperor's conferment. Colin thought for a while and said, "After I complete the prisoner exchange with the Eastern region and bring back Marquis Garcia, we will go to Imperial Dragon City. Otherwise, I will not be at ease if there is no reliable person at the northern frontier." Vera's eyes lit up and she said in surprise, "Have you made an appointment with the Eastern region to exchange the prisoners? Can I go with you?" "We made an appointment 3 months ago. I thought it would be postponed again, but I didn't expect the time to be just right." Colin patted Vera's little hand, knowing that she was worried about her father, but he still shook his head and said, "I will go by myself if you want to exchange the prisoners. You need to stay in Winter City. Now that the northern frontier has just been settled, we need someone who can make decisions to stabilize the situation." Vera was a little disappointed, but at the same time, she was also a little scared. If I am alone, will I be able to stabilize the situation?" Colin smiled and encouraged her, "You need to have confidence in yourself. You are St. Hilda, and you are also the first successor appointed by the previous Duke himself. Of course, you will not have any problems. What's more, you still have Scholar Dwayne with you. If you have any political problems, you can discuss them with him. As for military matters, you can absolutely trust Knight Charles and Viscounts Vala." Vera nodded, and she was a little confused. "What about Knight Nelson? Can I trust him completely?" "Of course, you can trust Knight Nelson, but I am just saying that if the worst happens, you can only entrust your life to Knight Charles and Viscounts Vala." Colin certainly could not tell Vera that Knight Charles and Viscounts Vala were his blood descendants, and there was no possibility of them betraying him. As for the others, well, it was hard to say. Vera nodded, indicating that she had remembered it. "Don't worry, I will be back soon. Well, be careful." Chapter 284. Alfalfa City was located at the southernmost tip of the Half-Elf Kingdom. The Crystal River and the Raging Water River intersected here, forming a Y shape that divided the city into 3 areas. It was shaped like a 3-leaf clover, hence the name Alfalfa City. The importance of Alfalfa City's geographical location was needless to say, but the strange thing was that this city was a typical 3 ungoverned area. In fact, if one thought about it carefully, such a situation was not difficult to understand. It was precisely because its geographical location was too important that although the northern frontier and the eastern region wanted to bring it under their rule, they were worried about provoking the other party. Therefore, they tacitly threw it to the Half-Elf Kingdom as a neutral buffer area that no one could touch. For the Half-Elf Kingdom, it was a hot potato that they did not dare to take care of. As a result, Alfalfa City was particularly awkward. There was no lord, no city defense army, and no order. This place gradually became a paradise for adventurers, a gathering place for refugees, and a carnival for anarchists. Strength became the only pass in Alfalfa City. However, Alfalfa City was suddenly quiet today. Even some of the big shots with some influence were obediently dormant. At the same time, they sternly warned their subordinates not to cause trouble for the next few days. This was because several armies had suddenly entered the city, including the famous Black Cavalry. Although there were a lot of lawless bandits and murderers in Alfalfa City, they were at most cockroaches and rats in the shadows. Once they saw a real lion or tiger, they still had to be careful and hide. Otherwise, it was very likely that they would be annihilated. The most majestic building in the north of the city was the Radiance Church. In such a chaotic city, the Radiance Church was one of the few peaceful places. Don't think that evil people did not have faith. In fact, it was the opposite. People who licked blood from their blades every day and did not know when they would die on the streets needed spiritual sustenance more so that they would not go crazy. When Colin walked into the main hall of the church, he saw the figure that had always been on his mind, Queen Aisha. The queen was standing in front of the statue of the Radiance God with her head lowered and eyes closed, praying devoutly. Slightly quickening his pace, Colin came to the side of Queen Aisha. After not seeing her for half a year, Queen Aisha's belly was already bulging. A faintly discernible motherly aura emanated from her body. Coupled with the noble and elegant aura of a queen, she appeared even more alluring. Noticing Colin's arrival, Queen Aisha ended her prayers, turned her head, and revealed a charming smile. "I thought you would be late. Knowing that you were waiting for me, of course I would travel day and night. Moreover, don't underestimate the speed of the Black Cavalry." Colin smiled as he stepped forward and carefully pulled Queen Aisha into his embrace. He then captured her tender red lips and tasted the fragrance that he hadn't tasted in a long time. After some tenderness, Queen Aisha leaned on Colin's chest and asked in a lazy tone, "You have an appointment with the Eastern region in 3 days, right?" "Yes, I have sent a messenger to the other side of the river to discuss the exchange of prisoners." Colin held Queen Aisha's waist with one hand and stroked her belly with the other, but it didn't take long before he began to climb up. Queen Aisha snorted, grabbed Colin's mischievous hand, and said, "This is a church?" Colin looked down at the snow-white cleavage. His heart was restless, but he had to be honest and asked, "Is there any problem with the food production of the half-elven kingdom this year? This round of turmoil has delayed the spring plowing on the northern frontier. It is estimated that the famine will continue or even worsen. So, I need your help." "No problem," Queen Aisha said confidently. "At the beginning of the year, I deliberately issued a farming order and increased the efforts of the spring plowing. If nothing unexpected happens, this autumn will be a bumper harvest." "That's good." Colin let out a sigh of relief. As long as we can last through this year, the northern frontier will be able to catch a breather, and everything will slowly get back on tracks. "But when you send people to buy food this autumn, it's best to bring the army." Queen Aisha's eyes flashed with a hint of sternness. "What's wrong? Is someone not being honest?" "Yes. At the end of last year, you forcefully bought food from Silver Moon City at a low price to aid the northern frontier. This has already made many half-elven merchants and nobles unhappy. If it happens again this year, I'm afraid that some people will overestimate themselves and do something stupid." Colin narrowed his eyes, and his tone became serious. "I understand. After I go back this time, I will let Duke Modowin lead the Silver Moon Guard back to the half-elven kingdom to help you stabilize the situation in the country." Queen Aisha shook her head gently and said, "There's no rush. I can still stabilize the situation in the half-elven kingdom. Leave the Silver Moon Guard at the northern frontier, you need it more. After the autumn harvest, it won't be too late to let Duke Modowin come back." Although Colin was still a little worried, he didn't want to refuse Queen Aisha's good intentions. He also didn't want her to think that he doubted her ability to control the situation in the country. "All right. If there are any changes in the situation in Silver Moon City, contact me immediately." "Yes." After a moment of silence, Queen Aisha opened her mouth again. "Recently, the situation in Alfalfa City has been a little strange. Colin didn't mind and laughed casually. The regular army has entered the city. Those cockroaches and rats in the shadows have of course hidden. No, that's not what I meant. Queen Aisha's tone became serious. Since the beginning of the year, a force called the Alfalfa Brotherhood suddenly rose up in the city. They swept away all the major forces in the city at an extremely fast speed, and have already taken control of Alfalfa City. Colin became serious. Who is the leader of this Alfalfa Brotherhood? Do you know? It's a 5th-rank warrior called Capone. He was wanted by the Eastern region because he resisted the Lord's conscription order and later fled to Alfalfa City. Although his martial strength is outstanding, he didn't mix well in Alfalfa City, a place where dragons and snakes mix together. Until the beginning of this year, he suddenly began to form his own force and expanded it at an extremely fast speed. Now, he has almost become the nominal master of this city. Someone is supporting him from behind, right? Colin guessed. I think so too. Moreover, I suspect that the Eastern region is supporting Capone and the Alfalfa Brotherhood. Eastern region? Hee, it seems that they aren't honest. Colin's gaze became dangerous. However, you don't have to worry too much. After you annihilated the Pegasus Legion in Silvermoon City, the House of St. Prospero lost its most elite troops. They certainly won't be able to touch the northern frontier in a short period of time. Using this kind of underhanded method to try to take control of Alfalfa City, they are worried that the northern frontier will establish a navy in Silvermoon City in the future and go down the Crystal River. Colin thought for a moment, and then said in a deep voice, Alfalfa City can't fall into the hands of the Eastern region. Queen Aisha raised her head, looked at Colin, and said, It's not good to have a conflict with the Eastern region at this time, right? Colin shook his head and said, Don't worry. Since the Eastern region chose to use this kind of underhanded method to take over Alfalfa City, they are also worried about having a direct conflict with the northern frontier. Therefore, it can be seen from this that the Eastern region is also weak. Then what are you going to do? Take advantage of the black cavalry in the city and directly destroy the Alfalfa Brotherhood? Colin stroked Queen Aisha's soft lower abdomen and said, No, it's better not to use military power to directly interfere. I am also worried that the Eastern region will be forced into a corner. If they are desperate and start another war in Alfalfa City, that would not be good. How about this? Alfalfa City is still under the rule of the Half-Elf Kingdom. In the name of the Half-Elf Queen, appoint a city lord of Alfalfa City. Let him unite the forces in the city that are unwilling to submit to the Alfalfa Brotherhood and fight against them. In short, don't let Alfalfa City completely fall into the hands of the Eastern region. In the future, when the northern frontier has recovered, they will have an excuse to intervene. Queen Aisha thought for a moment and nodded. Okay, I will go and find a suitable candidate. If the city lord fails and is killed by Capone, you can continue to appoint a new city lord. But never send a regular army into Alfalfa City. Let the jackals and wolves in the city tear each other apart and make it difficult for the Alfalfa Brotherhood to unify the forces in the city. I understand. There are many lawless and vicious people in Alfalfa City. It won't be difficult to find an opponent for Capone. It will be even easier to make this place chaotic. Colin saw that Queen Aisha understood his intentions so quickly and kissed her on the forehead with approval. Queen Aisha smiled and suggested, There is a hot spring behind the church. Do you want to soak in it? Colin certainly wouldn't refuse and immediately picked up Queen Aisha. Amidst the others' exclamation, he strode outside. Chapter 285. The gentle afternoon sun shone down on their bodies, making them feel warm. The small boat floating on the raging water river gently swayed along with the waves like a cradle, causing the people on the boat to feel drowsy. Colin stood up and stretched, as if he wanted to use this method to resist the surging drowsiness. There was still some distance to the center of the river where the captives would be changed, so Colin decided to strike up a conversation with Marquis Vincent beside him. Marquis Vincent, have you gotten used to living in Icestone City for the past half year? Marquis Vincent snorted lightly and ignored Colin. Half a year as a captive had caused the once high-spirited Marquis of the Eastern region to become much more haggard. However, Colin truly didn't abuse him, he wasn't that bored. Other than the fact that Marquis Vincent didn't have any personal freedom in Icestone City, he was provided with good food and drink. Every week, he would even find some skilled women to help him with his physiological needs. At first, Marquis Vincent thought that Colin was humiliating him. He was a Marquis of the Eastern region, the son of a noble holy knight family. How could he touch those lowly women? However, not long after, this noble Marquis of the Eastern region was controlled by his own surging desires and succumbed to the pomegranate skirts of those skilled women. He deeply demonstrated what it meant to say, "You say no, but your body is honest." However, although his physiological needs were satisfied, the mental humiliation caused Marquis Vincent to become thinner and thinner. There was never a moment when he didn't hope to leave that hellish place, Icestone City. Now, light had finally appeared. Marquis Vincent didn't want to see Colin's loathsome face for even a moment longer. Facing Marquis Vincent's undisguised loathing, Colin didn't get angry. He chuckled and continued to strike up a conversation. "I heard that after you were captured, the Duke of St. Prospero considered making your younger brother, the Earl of Avon, the first successor." Impossible. Hearing this, Marquis Vincent finally opened his mouth. What Colin said was his biggest nightmare after he was captured. Seeing that the other party had finally responded, Colin chuckled and continued, "I've met the Earl of Avon once. He's a smart man. If I were the Duke of St. Prospero, I would also consider changing my successor." Marquis Vincent gnashed his teeth in anger. He glared at Colin with undisguised hatred and cursed, "If I were your father, I would definitely strangle you to death in your cradle." His defense was broken. Colin shook his head. "Marquis Vincent, you've lost your composure." Marquis Vincent snorted and turned his head away, as if he didn't want to talk to Colin anymore. However, Colin opened his mouth again. "To be honest, I don't like your younger brother either. When we were in Silver Moon City, he stirred up trouble. Now, he has extended his hand into Alfalfa City. He's really a loathsome guy." Yes, after a few days of investigation, Colin already knew that the backer behind the Alfalfa Brotherhood was the Earl of Avon. Hearing this, Marquis Vincent's expression finally eased a little. He seemed to feel that he and Colin finally shared a common language. He coldly asked, "What are you trying to say?" Colin sat down opposite Marquis Vincent and smiled. "I also don't want to see your brother become the Marquis of the Eastern region. On this point, our interests are the same. So, why don't we cooperate?" Marquis Vincent sneered and disdainfully said, "Cooperation? Have you forgotten the deep hatred between us? You actually want to cooperate with me?" Colin shrugged and innocently said, "We have a grudge on the battlefield, but after all, it was an open confrontation between two armies. There's no selfless enmity between us. But your younger brother always uses insidious tricks. He's really annoying. He's simply a disgrace to the aristocracy." Marquis Vincent's expression eased a little. He stared at Colin for a long time and said, "My younger brother is indeed annoying. But if you want to stir up the conflict between us and cause the Eastern region to fall into civil strife, I advise you not to waste your energy." Colin still had a smile on his face. He didn't seem to be discouraged by the other party seeing through his scheme. Instead, he gently patted Marquis Vincent's shoulder and affectionately said, "Don't be in such a hurry to refuse. I really don't want to see a sinister and cunning guy who always causes trouble for me inherit the position of Duke of the Eastern region. So, you should think about it again. If you need anything in the future, you can contact me at any time. You should also know my current identity. Vera is about to inherit the position of Dukes of the North, and I am her husband. Don't you want to have a strong foreign aid?" Marquis Vincent bowed his head in silence. It was unknown whether he was convinced or not. Colin continued, "Whether you believe it or not, I am a peace-loving person and Vera is not an ambitious person. Of course, we would prefer a neighbor who is also peace-loving." Marquis Vincent seemed to be finally convinced and whispered, "I also don't want to be an enemy of the northern frontier." Colin smiled slightly as he knew that the other party was convinced. However, he didn't continue to persuade him. Too much is as bad as too little. When Marquis Vincent's position in the eastern region was really threatened by his younger brother, he would naturally remember that someone had extended an olive branch to him on the river today. At that time, just as the two were thinking about their own ideas, the boat slowly came to the middle of the river. There was already a luxuriously decorated flower boat parked there. The familiar fragrance of the blood rose filled the air. Apparently, it was Queen Aisha's boat. As the nominal ruler of Alfalfa City, Queen Aisha was the host of this captive exchange ceremony. At the same time as Colin arrived, another boat from the other side of the river was slowly approaching the flower boat. Thump. The gangway was lowered, and Colin and Marquis Vincent boarded the flower boat one after another. As soon as Colin stood on the deck, he saw the Earl of Avon and Marquis Garcia on the other side. After not seeing him for a long time, Marquis Garcia's hair was already white and he was also leaning on crutches. Apparently, the fiasco left him with injuries that were difficult to recover from. Although his eyes were still sharp, he no longer had the invincible momentum that he used to have. Colin sighed inwardly and then went forward to exchange greetings. Marquis Garcia had an indifferent expression as he greeted Colin and even nodded to his enemy, Marquis Vincent, as if he had forgotten everything. Marquis Vincent was also stunned. He obviously didn't expect Marquis Garcia to be so kind to him. In contrast, he and his younger brother, the Earl of Avon, had a strong smell of gunpowder between them. Queen Aisha leisurely walked in front of everyone and said with a smile, "The Lord once said that all hatred, resentment, and malice should be removed from your hearts. Only by treating each other with kindness, compassion, and forgiveness can you be redeemed." After saying that, she asked the maid to bring 5 glasses of wine and handed them to everyone. When everyone raised their glasses one after another, Queen Aisha continued, "Let us drink this glass together, in order to forgive each other, in order to redeem the Lord." Colin and the others followed suit and drained their cups in one gulp. The atmosphere eased slightly. The Earl of Avon looked at Colin and said with a smile, "Viscount Angley, I heard that the chaos at the northern frontier has been resolved. Congratulations." Colin also replied with a smile, "Thank you for your concern. In the end, evil can't defeat justice." Count Alvin nodded solemnly and said in an extremely sincere tone, "Don't worry. You're right. The House of St. Thean has forgotten their mission and honor. They actually did the evil thing of sacrificing a city. Their sin is unforgivable. If Prince Rhy hadn't killed Mr. Chi, the House of St. Prospero would have sent people to assist the House of St. Hilda in getting rid of this evil wizard." Colin smiled politely and didn't say anything. He obviously wouldn't take the other party's words seriously. The Earl of Avon's eyes moved slightly and continued, "Although Mr. Chi has received his due trial, as far as I know, the House of St. Thean still has some fish that escaped the net." Hearing this, Colin's interest was piqued. He asked, "Oh? Who are the remaining members of the House of St. Thean? Where are they hiding now?" "Mr. Chi's whereabouts are very secretive. It's very difficult to find out who the House of St. Thean still have. However, I do know the whereabouts of one of his sons." "Where?" The Earl of Avon pointed to the shore and said, "In Alfalfa City." Colin narrowed his eyes and asked, "What's his name?" The Earl of Avon spread his hands and said, "I didn't find out." Colin sneered in his heart. He obviously didn't believe this nonsense. It seemed that the Earl of Avon didn't want to say. However, Colin didn't intend to pursue the matter. With Mr. Chi's death, the House of St. Thean was nothing to be afraid of in Colin's view. What kind of threat could a family without its own territory and army be? The Earl of Avon turned to look at Queen Aisha and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, I heard that you have recently found a new Lord of Alfalfa City?" Queen Aisha nodded gently. The Earl of Avon had a mysterious smile on his face and said to Colin, "Viscount Angley, if you want to find the remaining member of the House of St. Thean, shouldn't you seek the help of the Lord of Alfalfa City?" Colin nodded lightly and said, "I will." However, the Earl of Avon's mysterious smile made Colin start to have wild thoughts. Could it be that the Lord of Alfalfa City that Queen Aisha had found was the remaining member of the House of St. Thean? Then I wish you good luck. The Earl of Avon immediately took his leave and left the boat with Marquis Vincent. Colin glanced at Marquis Garcia and asked respectfully, "Lord Marquis, shall we go back?" Marquis Garcia nodded and stared at the water, seemingly not in the mood to talk. Colin gave Queen Aisha a meaningful look, and then the boat began to slowly turn around and sail towards the shore. Chapter 286. The boat slowly sailed towards the shore. Marquis Garcia's eyes were deep as he could already see the figure of the cavalry on the shore. Although Marquis Garcia's complexion was still as calm as before, Colin could still see the other party's clenched fists. In order to ease the current awkward atmosphere, Colin took the initiative to talk about the changes that had happened in the northern frontier in the past 6 months. Marquis Garcia listened silently without any reaction. It wasn't until Colin had finished speaking that he commented faintly, "You did a good job." Colin couldn't help but stick out his chest, as if he was a student who had been praised by his teacher. But then, Marquis Garcia's next sentence made him fall from the clouds. "Her Majesty is pregnant with your child, right?" Colin immediately stiffened. He felt as if he had been caught red-handed by his father-in-law. For a moment, he didn't know whether to tell a lie or to admit it honestly. Fortunately, Queen Aisha whispered, "Your Excellency Marquis, I am pregnant with the child of the Miller family." Marquis Garcia understood the meaning of the Queen's words. This child would not become Colin's heir, and she would never threaten Vera's position. Therefore, Marquis Garcia once again looked at the other side of the shore and no longer spoke. Colin heaved a sigh of relief. However, he also reacted. In the culture of this world, the existence of aristocratic lovers was very tolerant. Most of the aristocrats had lovers and illegitimate children. Of course, the premise was that she would not threaten the position of the main wife. Otherwise, Marquis Garcia would not let Queen Aisha go so easily. Colin turned his head and quietly gave Queen Aisha a thumbs up. Queen Aisha responded with a charming smile. Seeing that Marquis Garcia did not have any desire to talk, and his whole body was exuding an isolated and indifferent aura, Colin did not dare to disturb him too much. He went to Queen Aisha's side and whispered, "Have you already decided on the candidate for the city lord of Alfalfa City?" "Yes." Queen Aisha nodded. She understood that Colin remembered what the Earl of Avon had said before he left. She then explained, "He shouldn't be a descendant of the House of St. Theange." "Why are you so sure?" Queen Aisha nodded and said a name that Colin was familiar with, Ron Lute. Someone from the Lute family? Colin remembered that the half-elf queen consort before Aisha was from the Lute family, and the Duke of Lute was the commander of the Silver Moon Guard. However, under the instigation of Sith Savoy, this person started a coup d'état. Of course, it was mercilessly extinguished in the end. As a result, the Lute family was stripped of their title and land by Queen Aisha, and they were banished from Silver Moon City. Queen Aisha explained, "This Ron is the nephew of the Duke of Lute. He is a third-rank knight and has some talent. He has gathered a group of people from the Lute family around him. Therefore, I gave him this opportunity. I promised that as long as he could secure the position of the city lord of Alfalfa City, I would confer this place to the Lute family and give them a corresponding title." Colin nodded and agreed with Queen Aisha's decision. First of all, since this Ron had a name and a surname, and his background could be investigated, then he couldn't be a descendant of the House of St. Thean. Moreover, as a former top family of the half-elves, Ron's ability, connections, and prestige were all guaranteed. It was better than having a fugitive as the city lord. Tell him to pay attention to whether there are any suspicious people. I know. After Colin gave a simple explanation, he didn't say anything else. At present, he didn't have the time to play hide and seek with the descendant of the House of St. Thean in Alfalfa City. He didn't even have the time to care about the ownership of this city. His top priority was to return to the northern frontier as soon as possible and take Vera to Imperial Dragon City to meet Emperor Reinhardt. He wanted to completely finalize the succession of the Dukes of the North. After that, he would be able to free up his hands and solve these messy problems. However, he really didn't pay attention to the descendant of the House of St. Thean. After all, even Mr. Luo was dead. What could the House of St. Thean do? Moreover, Colin also suspected that the descendant of the House of St. Thean didn't exist at all. Could it be that the Earl of Avon deliberately scattered a smoke bomb? While his thoughts were running wild, the boat slowly approached the shore. Before Marquis Garcia got off the boat, he saw the black cavalry kneeling on the shore. Knight Roger yelled at the top of his voice. The Black Cavalry welcomes the return of Lord Marquis. The Black Cavalry welcomes the return of Lord Marquis. The voices of the nearly 10,000 Black Cavalry soldiers resounded through the New River, and a somber atmosphere began to slowly gather. Colin silently looked at the scene in front of him with deep eyes. He had no doubt that as long as Marquis Garcia gave the order, the Black Cavalry would immediately cross the river to avenge him. They didn't even care if the northern frontier could support another war at this time, and they didn't care if the 10,000 Black Cavalry soldiers could sweep the eastern region. Where one person pointed, the whole army would follow. This was the prestige of Marquis Garcia in the Black Cavalry. Even if Colin had already led this army to several great victories, even if Knight Roger had already led the Black Cavalry soldiers to swear allegiance to Colin under the command of Marquis Garcia, he still couldn't erase the imprint that Marquis Garcia had firmly engraved in the souls of this army. At this time, Colin couldn't help but worry that the Black Cavalry would leave him. Marquis Garcia's deep eyes slowly swept across the Black Cavalry soldiers on the shore. Everywhere he looked, every Black Cavalry soldier couldn't help but straighten their chests, accepting the inspection of the person they believed in. Perhaps it was because they saw Marquis Garcia's white hair and the walking stick in his hand, but the breathing of the Black Cavalry soldiers gradually became heavier, and their eyes seemed to have flames dancing. The northern wind whimpered, and under the reflection of the setting sun, the river of wrath looked like blood surging. But just as this momentum rose to its peak, Marquis Garcia suddenly opened his mouth. "I don't have the qualifications to be your commander." Knight Roger was just about to speak, but he was forced to retreat by Marquis Garcia's cold gaze. "I trusted the wrong person, which led to the crushing defeat in Shadow Canyon. I was unwilling to accept the fact that I couldn't abide by the promise to live and die with the Black Cavalry. I was also unable to see through the enemy's conspiracy, which led to the northern frontier falling into chaos and suffering. I don't ask for your forgiveness, but I also don't have the face to lead you." Marquis Garcia raised his finger and pointed at Colin, saying in a clear voice, "You need a new commander." Colin's heart was in turmoil. He turned his head and saw Marquis Garcia's deep gaze. In this gaze, there was guilt, relief, and ardent expectation. Colin understood that Marquis Garcia was officially handing over the Black Cavalry to him. Although this was the scene he yearned for day and night, when it came to it, Colin was still moved. At the same time, he was also shocked by this heavy responsibility. Marquis Garcia smiled slightly, and his tone was full of encouragement. "From now on, the Black Cavalry will become history. Viscount Angley, give this army that belongs to you a new name." Colin's mind turned quickly, knowing that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If he missed this opportunity, he didn't know when he would be able to truly subdue the strongest army in the northern frontier. "Let's call it the Blood Cavalry," Colin said in a clear voice, "originated from the Black Cavalry, reborn in blood, and will grow in the blood of the enemy." Marquis Garcia whispered the name of the Blood Cavalry several times, with a satisfied smile on his face. Then, he slowly stepped back a few steps, highlighting Colin's position. Colin also took the responsibility and said in a clear voice, "Blood Cavalry, listen to my order." Bang! Knight Roger's left hand heavily hit the armor on his chest, and his eyes moved from Marquis Garcia to Colin. Then, a series of knocks resounded through the sky, converging into a unified voice. The former Black Cavalry soldiers finally really accepted the change of their identity. Colin's heart was surging, and he ordered, "Escort Marquis Garcia back to the northern frontier." "Yes, Blood Cavalry." Colin stood on the bow of the ship with his head held high, accepting the cheers of the Blood Cavalry soldiers, and his heart was surging with incomparable heroism. Behind him, Marquis Garcia stared at Colin's tall and straight heroic figure. In a trance, he seemed to see himself 20 years ago. The two men, one in front and one behind, one in high spirits, the other in bleak. It seemed to mark the end of an old era and the beginning of a new era. Chapter 287. The dense clouds obscured the silver moon, leaving only a dim halo in the sky. The weak moonlight couldn't even outline the shadows. In the dark Imperial Dragon City, there were only sporadic embellishments. The only exception was the northernmost part of Imperial Dragon City. That a strange golden light fell from the sky, propping up the dark curtain of night. It was the direction of the Holy Mountain, and also the Holy Land of the Church of Glory, the Cathedral of Holy Light. This inextinguishable pillar of holy light was like an eternal lighthouse, illuminating the lost people in the deep darkness with hope and direction. It was like this tonight and every night. In the crisp sound of horse hooves, a four-wheeled carriage pulled by 3 tall horses slowly moved towards the Cathedral of Holy Light. The guards on night duty didn't stop the carriage. Instead, they stood with their heads held high and lined up to welcome the distinguished guests. Those who were qualified to ride a four-wheeled carriage to the peak of the Holy Mountain must be important people of noble status. In the middle of the carriage's side wall, there was a purifying scarlet flame pattern. Obviously, the visitor must be a core member of the imperial family. The carriage slowly stopped in front of the steps of the Cathedral of Holy Light. A knight with a sword jumped down from the open-air seat at the back of the carriage, ignoring the church guards who came forward to inquire. He held a crystal lamp in one hand and placed a golden step in the other at the door of the carriage. Then the door opened, and a tall and slender woman stepped out of the carriage. She wore a slightly simple prayer dress, but her beautiful face made the church guards' hearts tremble. They didn't dare to look at her, and quickly bowed their heads and saluted. "Your Highness." Empress Medela nodded gently in greeting, then walked up the steps towards the church. The unique rhythm of her walk accentuated her peerless beauty, and under the illumination of the holy light that descended from the sky, there was a hint of holiness. The prayer hall of the church was extremely large. Dozens of limestone pillars supported the 24-meter-high dome, giving people a feeling of insignificance. In addition, there were 4 huge statues of sword-wielding angels, which made people feel even more awe-inspiring. The dome of the prayer hall was made of a special crystal. The inextinguishable holy light passed through the dome, plating everything in the hall with a layer of gold, showing a sense of holiness and solemnity. Empress Medela stood in front of the statue of the God of Light, her hands clasped together in prayer. A faint chanting sound echoed in the prayer hall. It sounded like someone was singing a hymn, but it also sounded like an echo from heaven. Tranquility, serenity, and a soothing power filled the air. After an unknown period of time, Empress Medela finished her prayer. She raised her head and looked at the holy light that seemed to lead to heaven. A hint of mockery appeared on her face. "Are you really listening?" Medela asked in a voice as soft as a mosquito's. The holy light was still as dazzling as before, as if it had not changed at all because of the Empress' disrespectful questioning. The mockery on Queen Medela's face deepened. "Perhaps it's as he said, you're already dead." There was still no response. Empress Medela shook her head, seemingly losing her patience. She slowly turned around and saw a bald old priest standing behind her. She didn't know how long he had been standing there, or if he had heard what the Empress had said. The purple priest's robe he wore indicated his noble identity, the Pope. The priest's robe of the Church of Light could be white, gray, or black. These colors could be worn by archbishops to ordinary priests, but there were 2 special colors that they could not wear, red and purple. The red priest's robe was worn by the 3 cardinals. They were the 3 people with the highest status in the church other than the Pope. Because of the color of the priest's robe, they were also called cardinals. As for the purple priest's robe, only the Pope himself could wear it. "Good evening, Your Holiness Gregory." Empress Medela did not panic at all, as if she did not care if the Pope had heard her muttering just now. "Good evening, Your Highness." Pope Gregory had a kind face, and his smile had a natural affinity, as if all the sufferings in the world could be dispelled by his smile. "Is His Majesty's illness better?" Empress Medela sighed, a hint of worry appearing on her exquisite face. She shook her head and said, "Not yet. He woke up for a while this morning, but soon fell into a deep sleep again." The smile on Pope Gregory's face also disappeared, and he seemed to be very surprised. Even Tournan was unable to improve His Majesty's condition? Empress Medela looked sorrowful. Cardinal Tournan is still unable to find the cause of His Majesty's illness, so I'm afraid it's a little tricky. Pope Gregory sighed and comforted her. Then I'll personally go to Phoenix Palace tomorrow. The God of Light will not give up on his devout shepherd. Please rest assured. Empress Medela hurriedly bowed and thanked him, then took her leave. Watching the graceful figure of the Empress disappear at the entrance of the prayer hall, the Pope looked up at the holy light descending from the sky with a complicated expression in his eyes. Not long after, an attendant quickly came to Pope Gregory's side and reported softly, "Your Holiness, Archbishop Ajani is back." Pope Gregory raised his eyebrows and thought for a moment. "Let her wait for me in the confessional at the lowest level of the side halls." Then Pope Gregory came to the statue of the God of Light and stood still. He put his palms together and lowered his head in prayer, perhaps praying for the emperor who had suddenly become seriously ill. After the prayer, Pope Gregory left the prayer hall, passed through the long corridor, and followed the spiral staircase to the lowest level of the cathedral. Facing him was a smooth stone wall with a huge oak door installed on the wall. Pope Gregory pushed the door open and entered. The furnishings in the room were simple, with only a table and 2 chairs. On the table was a scripture of light and a row of silver candlesticks. In the soft candlelight, Ajani, dressed in a white robe, immediately stood up and bowed to the Pope. Gregory still had a compassionate smile on his face, but the words that came out of his mouth were not polite at all. "You disappoint me." Ajani's heart trembled as she defended herself. "Your Holiness, there have been too many unforeseen events on the northern frontier. I can't. Am I looking for an excuse?" Gregory interrupted. Ajani immediately shut her mouth, as if realizing something. She asked softly in a slightly trembling voice, "Are you going to punish me? Anyone who has done wrong should be punished." Hearing this, Ajani's breathing suddenly quickened, her watery peach blossom eyes instantly filled with fear. But under Gregory's forceful gaze, she silently turned around and knelt on the ground, her arms crossed and her eyes closed, waiting for the impending punishment. At some point, a long whip had appeared in Gregory's hand. The whip was covered with spikes, and one could even smell the thick stench of blood. Crack. The long whip lashed against Ajani's back, leaving a bloody whip mark on her back. A suppressed cry of pain came from Ajani's mouth. Her body was like a fragile flower in a storm, trembling. A satisfied smile appeared on Gregory's face, but he did not stop swinging the whip. Crack. The long whips fell like a storm, tearing the sorcerer robe behind Ajani to shreds. Bloody whip marks appeared one after another, forming a shocking contrast with her snow-white and flawless skin. It actually had a sad and cruel beauty to it. Ajani couldn't help but let out a series of painful moans. And this sound of ecstasy only made the perpetrator even more excited. The smile on Gregory's face became more and more brilliant, his eyes flashing with a perverted light, as if he had obtained great satisfaction from torturing a beautiful girl. This satisfaction of dominating and suppressing a beauty was very similar to sexual pleasure, and even more so. Generally, the priests of the Church of Radiance did not abstain from sexual desires. Marrying and having children did not hinder them from serving the God of Radiance. But if this priest had lofty ambitions, vainly thinking that he could one day reach the peak of the holy mountain, wear the crown of thorns and become the Pope, then he had to maintain a pure body. The reason was very simple. Legend had it that the Church of Radiance had a divine weapon that could communicate with heaven, the golden horn, which had been wielded by successive popes. But to blow the golden horn, this person had to dedicate himself wholeheartedly to the God of Radiance, and could not be tainted by the affairs of men and women. Therefore, there were many ascetics in the church who abstained from sexual desires, and this Gregory who could ascend to the position of Pope was of course even more so. Between beauty and power, Gregory naturally knew which to choose. But as long as one was human, there would always be desires and desires that needed to be dispelled. But he did not expect Gregory's method of dispelling to be so perverted and cruel. After a long time, Gregory finally finished venting. At this time, Ajani was already lying on the ground weakly, gasping for breath with difficulty. Her entire back was covered with ferocious crisscrossing whip scars, dripping with blood. It was a tragic sight. Gregory threw away the long whip and took out an exquisite little bottle, dripping the holy water from the bottle onto Ajani's back. Ajani's body could not help but tremble and twitch. It was obvious that the process was not pleasant. God has mercy on the world. The Lord heals all living beings. Gregory cast a healing spell on Ajani, and a compassionate smile once again appeared on his face. In an instant he had returned to being the sanctimonious Pope. It had to be said that the healing spell cast by the Pope himself was indeed powerful. Combined with the holy water, the scars on Ajani's back healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and soon disappeared. Ajani finally got up, and slowly sat up from the ground. Her mage robe had long been damaged by the whip, and now it had completely slipped off, revealing her infinitely beautiful upper body. Ajani did not even try to hide it, and it was unknown whether it was because she did not dare to, or because she was deliberately provoking the man in front of her. Gregory looked away as if he had been electrocuted, as if he was afraid that if he looked at her a few more times, he would not be able to control himself, and the results of most of his life's hard work would be destroyed. Ajani seemed to have seen this scene, and she lowered her head, but the corners of her mouth were slightly raised, as if she was disdainful, but also as if she was happy that she had succeeded in her revenge. Gregory coughed a few times and ordered, "Vera St. Hilda will arrive at Imperial Dragon City soon. At this time, the northern frontier has no leader, so you should immediately rush back to Winter City and see if you can take the opportunity to win over more lords." "Yes," Ajani replied obediently. Gregory took one last greedy look at Ajani's exquisite curves, and then he turned around, pushed the door open and walked out. The confessional was quiet again. Ajani was stunned for a long time, and then she picked up the bloody long whip from the ground and looked at it carefully, as if she wanted to see some mystery in it. A moment later, she pressed the long whip against her chest and let the blood on it wet her snow-white skin again. She slowly tightened her hand, and the barbs on the long whip immediately pierced her chest, and blood oozed out again. Ajani groaned softly, and it was a little painful. But then her tightly knitted brows slowly relaxed, and a look of enjoyment appeared on her face. Ajani looked up, and her deep eyes seemed to penetrate the layers of obstacles, and rose to the sky along the holy light. The omnipotent God of light, the lost lamb needs guidance. Please listen to her confession. Chapter 288. Do you think there are still dragons in this world? Colin suddenly asked with a smile as he looked at the tall and majestic walls of Imperial Dragon City. Vera was riding on the same horse as him. At this time, she was curled up in her husband's warm embrace. She replied in a lazy tone, "Dragons are extinct. Of course there are no dragons left." Colin seemed to be a little unwilling to give up. He said stubbornly, "Maybe there are some surviving dragons hiding in some dark corner?" Vera pursed her lips and smiled. She explained, "There is such a possibility, but it is not very likely. According to the records, the High Elves created a wonderful spell called the Dragon Search spell. It can locate the approximate location of the dragons in the world. Therefore, if there are still dragons in the world, the High Elves will definitely know. However, the conclusion that the dragons are extinct was made by the High Elves. I think they said that because they are confident." Colin nodded. Only then did he understand. But then he sighed with some regret. "That's really a pity. I still want to see the glory of a giant dragon." Scholar Dwayne interrupted, "The dragons should be extinct, but there is still a dragon egg in the Phoenix Palace. If Lord Viscounts is interested, you can go and take a look." Dragon egg? It did not hatch? Colin was interested. Of course not. Scholar Dwayne shook his head. The San Lorenzo family has also tried all kinds of methods, but the dragon egg did not show any signs of life. Vera saw Colin's yearning face and smiled. "Colin, if you are interested in dragons, you can go to Yevil. The Mage Council still has a few dragon skeletons." However, most of the dragon skeletons are in the hands of the elves. If the Radiant Moon Forest is not a forbidden area, you can feast your eyes on it. It is a forbidden area now, but it might not be in the future, Colin said excitedly. Yes, in fact, the mages have also been trying to find a way to enter the Radiant Moon Forest. Imperial Dragon City was in front of them while the three of them were discussing enthusiastically. The welcoming team was already lined up neatly outside the city gate. The beautiful figure in the lead was Empress Medela. Aunt Vera quickly jumped down from her horse and walked a few steps forward before she hugged Empress Medela affectionately. Medela gently stroked Vera's back as she tried to comfort her. I have also heard about what happened to your father. I am really sorry. Vera nodded her head gently and did not say anything else. Her feelings for the Duke of St. Hilda were very complicated, and she did not know how to express it. Your Highness. Colin hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. Queen Medela smiled and said, Colin, it is a pity that I was not able to attend your wedding. However, I am also very pleased that Vera has such an outstanding knight to protect her. It's my honor to receive your recognition. From now on, I'll work even harder and definitely won't let you down. Colin maintained his politeness on the surface, but in his heart he kept a respectful distance from this beautiful empress. The other party's actions in Silvermoon City had already let Colin know that this woman was not someone to be trifled with. This time, his plan in coming to Imperial Dragon City was to let Vera receive the title as soon as possible and then immediately return to officially take over the northern frontier. Only by redeveloping the northern frontier would Colin be able to gain a firm foothold in this world. Under the lead of Empress Medela, Colin and the others entered Imperial Dragon City. As the Radiant Empire and the largest city in this world, Imperial Dragon City was indeed much more prosperous than Winter City. The spacious streets were full of pedestrians coming and going, but after seeing the royal flag, they all moved to the side of the road and curiously observed who was entering the city. In order to avoid unnecessary disturbances, Colin and Vera both got into the Empress carriage so that outsiders could not see them. However, there were still some smart people who recognized the team of the House of St. Hilda from the Golden Lion badge, and they knew that it should be the successor of the Dukes of the North who had come to receive the title of the Emperor. All the way to the Phoenix Palace, Colin jumped out of the carriage first and then helped Vera and Empress Medela out of the carriage in a very gentlemanly manner. The palace maids who were waiting for them took out colorful petals from their baskets and sprinkled them in the air, and soon the road leading to the Phoenix Palace was covered with petals. Vera held onto Colin's arm, stepped on the stairs covered with flowers, and walked towards the magnificent Phoenix Palace. Originally, Colin thought that Emperor Reinhardt would welcome them in the palace, but unexpectedly he did not see the Emperor of the Radiant Empire. This made him wonder if the Emperor was really too busy, or did he have a problem with Vera? According to Scholar Dwayne's judgment, Emperor Reinhardt should want to see Vera inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, but now it seemed that something was wrong. Colin's heart was filled with a trace of haze, and he did not even pay much attention to the magnificent Phoenix Palace. Empress Medela led Colin and Vera into the reception hall of the side palace. The decoration style of the hall was not particularly luxurious, but if one looked carefully, they would find that there was a subtle elegance hidden in the subtle details. Exquisite and unique murals and sculptures decorated the corners of the hall, and the floor was covered with hundreds of years-old paulownia wood. There were 7 crystal magic lamps hanging from the ceiling, and even though it was daytime, they still emitted a soft light. The 3 of them sat down, and several beautiful palace maids came in with silver plates to serve drinks and desserts. Out of courtesy, Vera looked at the murals on the wall. At this time, Colin wisely kept his mouth shut. As the son of the Baron in the countryside, his artistic skills were limited, and he did not want to make a fool of himself. Fortunately, Empress Medela was also a member of the House of St. Hilda, and the atmosphere quickly became casual and cordial. However, Colin was a little absent-minded. He was wondering when Emperor Reinhardt was going to appear. However, from the beginning to the end, they did not see the ruler of the empire. Instead, they saw the son and daughter of the Empress. Colin had already met Prince Harrison in Silvermoon City. Perhaps Colin had left a deep impression on the prince, but when he saw Colin again, he was a little afraid. When he greeted Colin, he was obviously avoiding eye contact. As for Princess Judy, this was the first time that Colin had seen her. She was slightly younger than Prince Harrison and wore a cute floral pleated dress. Her hair was tied up in 2 ponytails, and she wore a pair of silver crystal shoes. She looked very much like Empress Medela. She was a beauty, but there was still some baby fat on her face, which made her even more lovable. Moreover, she seemed to know how to play to her advantage. As soon as they met, she called Sister Vera and Brother Colin very sweetly. Vera's heart was quickly captured, and she held Judy in her arms and did not want to let go. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly became warmer, and the topic of conversation became the children's story. Vera and Colin's trip to the imperial capital seemed to have become a visit to their relatives. However, until the end of the meeting, Empress Medela did not mention anything about the Duke's conferment, nor did she say when Emperor Reinhardt would meet Vera. Since the other party did not mention it, Colin did not dare to ask. When Empress Medela got up and sent Vera and Colin to rest, only Prince Harrison and Princess Judy were left in the living room. Judy was still eating the remaining dessert with relish, while Harrison was staring blankly at the ground. No one knew what he was thinking. "Brother, aren't you going to eat?" Judy asked kindly. Harrison shook his head absent-mindedly. "That Viscount Angley is nothing to be afraid of." "When did I say that I was afraid of him?" Harrison was like a kitten whose tail had been stepped on, and he suddenly became angry. Judy's charmingly naive appearance was gone, and she revealed her true colors as she smiled and said, "Do you want me to avenge you?" Harrison seemed to be a little moved, but he still said stubbornly, I don't have a grudge against him." "Is that so? Then who was the one who had nightmares at night and called out his name, and even wet the bed?" Coo. Seeing his sister laughing at him, Harrison was so angry that his face turned red. He jumped up from the chair and walked out without looking back. "Hey, Brother Harrison, wait for me." Chapter 289. While Vera and Colin were being escorted to the Phoenix Palace by Queen Medela, Scholar Dwayne came to the southern district of Imperial Dragon City alone. Since the Sacred Mountain and Phoenix Palace were both located in the northern district of Imperial Dragon City, nobles with some status would think of ways to settle down in the northern district. As for the southern district, it naturally became a gathering place for the commoners. The further south one went, the more dilapidated the buildings became. However, in such a residential area, there was a manor that did not fit in with the surrounding environment. Although the location of the manor was not good, it occupied a large area. There were many fruit trees that had sprouted out of the ground, and there were several unique villas within the walls. There were also stables, barracks, warehouses, and gardens. It was definitely a noble manor. In the entire Imperial Dragon City, the only person who was willing to build such a manor in the residential area was the Prime Minister, Baron Heidegger. The Prime Minister of the Empire, who was born as a commoner, had always kept a respectful distance from the nobles. This was something that could not be changed even though he had been in a high position for more than 40 years. Perhaps it was precisely because he was born at the bottom that he was able to understand the thoughts of the people at the bottom, that he was able to govern the empire to such an extent. Of course, this might also be the reason why the Senate of the Empire had always looked down on this country bumpkin. After confirming his identity, Scholar Dwayne was led into the manor by the butler. However, the butler did not lead Scholar Dwayne to the study room or the living room. Instead, he led him to a lawn behind the main castle. There, Scholar Dwayne saw the Prime Minister of the Empire, who was squatting on the ground and roasting sweet potatoes. Baron Heidegger was already in his 70s. His hair was white, but he was still hale and hearty. He was wearing a slightly old but tidy casual outfit, and he looked like an ordinary old man. He did not have the aura of someone who was in charge of the Empire's government at all. "Prime Minister." Scholar Dwayne quickened his pace as he stepped forward and bowed. Baron Heidegger was obviously very familiar with Scholar Dwayne. When he saw Scholar Dwayne, he pointed at the ground and said casually, "Have a seat and have a taste of my roasted sweet potatoes." "But Scholar Dwayne did not feel that he had been neglected. He sat down on the lawn and took the sweet potato from the Baron with a smile. Perhaps it was a little hot, so he quickly blew on it and tossed it in his hand. Due to years of hard work, Baron Heidegger's eyes had lost the vigor they should have. They were dull and dull, but everyone who was stared at by this pair of dull eyes would feel uncomfortable. It was as if he had the ability to see through everything, making everyone unable to hide the filth in their hearts. Scholar Dwayne, on the other hand, maintained his leisurely demeanor under such gazes. He carefully peeled the sweet potato in his hand and ate it with relish. Seeing how the other party was enjoying himself, a smile appeared on Baron Heidegger's face, and he asked, "Is there any problem with the food supply in the northern frontier this year?" Viscount Angley has received great support from the half-elven kingdom, so he should be able to survive this year. It's just that the commoners will have a hard time. At this point, Scholar Dwayne raised his head and looked at Baron Heidegger with hopeful eyes. He asked, "If the central government of the empire can provide some food, then the situation in the northern frontier will be much better." Baron Heidegger shook his head and refused. "It's not that I don't want to help you, but I'm afraid that there will be some problems with the food supply in the Flame territory this year." "What's wrong?" Scholar Dwayne was rather puzzled. There haven't been any disasters in the Flame territory in recent years, right? Baron Heidegger's face became a little solemn. "The situation in the western region is a little bad. The St. Gerian family has sent letters to the central government of the empire several times, asking for support. However, His Majesty and the Senate have not agreed to send troops. They only agreed to provide food and material support." Scholar Dwayne also frowned. He asked, "Is the orcs putting so much pressure on us?" According to the letter from the St. Gerian family, an orc force called the Battlecry tribe is rising at an extremely terrifying speed. The western region has no choice but to send an expeditionary force over the Broken Sky mountain range to carry out military intervention to prevent the Battlecry tribe from taking advantage of the situation and even unifying the orcs to establish the Third Orc Empire. The Third Orc Empire? Scholar Dwayne was horrified. The Radiant Empire established by the humans occupied the most fertile area in the central part of the continent, but it was inevitable that there would be other races coveting it. Other than the dwarves, goblins, and half-elves, who were weak and could only rely on the Radiant Empire, there were only 4 races that could really threaten the humans: the trolls in the north, the elves in the east, the nagas in the south, and the orcs in the west. The elves had long disappeared from the Radiant Moon Forest, so the eastern region of the empire was actually the most stable. The nagas were an amphibious race. Being away from water for a long time would cause their skin to become dehydrated and dry. Therefore, their harm to the southern region was limited to their daily plundering. At most, they would occupy some coastal areas and were not much of a threat. The trolls in the north were once a great threat, but under the strong suppression of the northern frontier, they could no longer cause any trouble. Now, they only dared to hide far away in the northern part of the sky ice field, struggling at death's door. Only the orcs in the west had always been a big threat to the Radiant Empire. If the other 3 races did not have an absolute advantage in military force compared to the humans, then the orcs were different. An ordinary orc soldier basically required 3 or 4 human soldiers to deal with. In terms of professionals, the orcs believed in the god of destruction, and their divine profession was Skull Crusher. Their strength was far beyond that of human knights of the same level, and they were completely invincible. Fortunately, although the orcs were superior in military force, they were lacking in intelligence. Therefore, the development of the orc civilization could be said to be at the bottom of the 5 races. Until now, they were still in a loose tribal form, fighting with each other, and it was difficult to form a joint force. But there were exceptions to everything. In the history of the orcs, there were also many talented heroes. Under their efforts, the orcs had 2 short periods of unification. That was the so-called First Orc Empire and Second Orc Empire. Once the orcs were unified, the orc army they formed would definitely be the most terrifying existence on this continent. After the establishment of the Second Orc Empire last time, the orc army marched straight into the western region. It only took them 3 months to break through the western region, annihilate the main army of the Flaming Flame territory, and besiege the Imperial Dragon City. If it were not for the fact that the Imperial Dragon City could not be taken down for a long time, and the internal contradictions of the Second Orc Empire gradually became apparent, causing the human race to seize the opportunity and plot to make the Second Orc Empire fall apart, the ruler of this continent would have changed. But after that, the Radiant Empire had always been on guard against the orcs, fearing that the orcs would unite again and even establish a third orc empire. Therefore, this time, when the Battlecry tribe rose strongly and showed signs of unifying the orcs, the Western region immediately sent an expeditionary force to cross the Sky-Broken Mountain Range in an attempt to intervene with military force and nip the danger in the bud. Scholar Dwayne also knew the severity of the matter and did not mention the matter of borrowing food. Instead, he asked, "How is the situation of the expeditionary force sent by the Western region?" The Sangarian family sent the expeditionary force last October, and there is no clear good news yet. Therefore, it is difficult for me to judge the situation in the west of the Sky-Broken Mountain Range. Then, the two of them fell silent at the same time, obviously worried. After a while, Scholar Dwayne spoke again. Since the Sangarian family has repeatedly asked the Empire for support, why has His Majesty not agreed? Baron Heidegger smiled faintly and said, "It has been more than 1,000 years since the fall of the Second Orc Empire. The Western region has submitted hundreds of requests for help to the Empire's Central. Every time, some tribe is rising strongly and showing signs of unifying the orcs. At first, the Empire's Central attached great importance to it and sent troops almost every time. But later, we gradually found out that the Sangarian family was just exaggerating and wanted the Empire's Central to help them clean up the trouble at the border. Later, unless the threat of the orcs was confirmed, the Empire's Central would not easily send troops to the Western region." Scholar Dwayne was also somewhat helpless. It turned out that the Empire's Central was also afraid of the Western region. Baron Heidegger glanced at Scholar Dwayne and said, "Moreover, at that time, the northern frontier was in chaos. His Majesty might have wanted to intervene. But later, due to some reasons, it was also left unsettled." Scholar Dwayne's eyes flashed. He thought to himself, is the Menham family sending troops to the northern frontier not considered intervention? Now that the northern frontier has been pacified, but there is no good news from the Western region's expeditionary force. His Majesty should be prepared to send troops to support the Sangarian family, right? Baron Heidegger shook his head, and his eyes became even more worried. Scholar Dwayne was puzzled. He would rather believe in the orcs' unification than not. He did not understand why His Majesty was so careless. Baron Heidegger narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Because someone wants to start another war." Chapter 290. Another war? Scholar Dwayne exclaimed in shock. Baron Heidegger nodded expressionlessly and explained, "Prince Rhy wants to declare war on the Mage Congress and send troops to attack Ewell." Scholar Dwayne was silent. He could also understand Prince Rhy's motive. The appearance of the forbidden spell trials made all the knights of the Empire unable to eat or sleep in peace, especially the paladin Prince Lacey. He had already killed Mr. Hale, but now, it seemed that he wanted to completely destroy the Mage Congress. Ewell will not allow himself to be captured without a fight. Has Prince Lacey not thought of the consequences of doing so? Is he not worried that the mages will risk their lives to destroy him? Baron Heidegger sighed and said, "You have not interacted much with Prince Rhy, so you do not understand him. He is not someone who can be threatened. Back then, Emperor Reinhardt secretly made an agreement with Mr. Hale, thinking that he could use the power of the mages to suppress Prince Rhy. Unfortunately, he did not understand. No, perhaps he did, but he did not want to believe it. If someone held a sword to Prince Rhy's neck, his first reaction would not be to compromise, but to pull out his sword and stab. Even if his neck was pierced through because of this. This is the pride of a holy knight." Scholar Dwayne was speechless. Indeed, if Prince Lacey had been coerced by such means, he wouldn't have been able to overcome all the obstacles and enter the sanctuary realm. Therefore, after knowing that Mr. Hale used a forbidden spell to kill the Duke of St. Hilda, Prince Rhy immediately went to the northern frontier and decisively killed Mr. Hale. He was not worried about whether this action would attract the revenge of the mages. He even wanted to completely destroy the Mage Congress. Perhaps he was already prepared to become the next target of this forbidden spell, Trial's Eye. The mages claimed that they wanted to destroy him, but the Holy Knights would rather die than submit. Scholar Dwayne's heart was heavy. He asked again, "Has Prince Rhy's proposal been discussed in the Imperial Conference? What is the result? What is the opinion of the Senate?" Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, "The Imperial Conference has not been held yet, so the attitude of the parties is not clear. When will the Imperial Conference be held? Could it be that this proposal has just been proposed? No, half a month ago, after Prince Lacy returned from the northern frontier, he proposed this declaration of war, but it was never brought to the Imperial Conference for discussion. Because Baron Heidegger frowned. Because His Majesty never attends the Imperial Conference. It's impossible for me to preside over such an important topic. Scholar Dawn frowned as well. He had heard that Emperor Reinhardt was not in charge of military affairs. He left military affairs to Prince Leitch, government affairs to Baron Heidegger, and foreign affairs to Empress Medela. In short, he was either obsessed with pursuing the path of a knight, or busy with cuckolding the nobles in the imperial capital. However, Scholar Dwayne did not expect that Emperor Reinhardt would not attend the Imperial Conference even though the war against the mages was about to be declared. This was too absurd. Scholar Dwayne immediately realized that perhaps Emperor Reinhardt was deliberately not attending the Imperial Conference. He was definitely not willing to declare war on the mages, and was even counting on the mages to keep Prince Lacy in check. Therefore, in the face of Prince Lacy's tyrannical behavior, Emperor Reinhardt chose to hide. Are we going to drag this out forever? Scholar Dwayne felt that Emperor Reinhardt's choice was not wise. Baron Heidegger's lips curled into a mocking smile. How can Prince Lacy let this proposal drag on forever? There is another way to mobilize the central army of the Empire other than His Majesty's order. The Senate. Scholar Dwayne immediately reacted. But then his frown deepened. The Senate was set up to restrict the power of the king. If there was an extremely absurd emperor, there had to be an organization that could keep him in check. According to the Glorious Charter, as long as the Senate could pass a resolution with an absolute majority, the resolution could take effect directly without the consent of the emperor. Therefore, as long as Prince Lacy could obtain more than 2/3 of the support in the Senate, he could directly bypass Emperor Reinhardt and start a war against Yule. However, Scholar Dwayne also realized that if Prince Lacy really did this, he would completely fall out with Emperor Reinhardt. Will the Senate support Prince Lacy in this matter? Scholar Dwayne's tone was somewhat heavy. Baron Heidegger shrugged and put on a helpless expression. You're asking the wrong person. I can't find out the true attitude of the elders in the Senate. Scholar Dwayne then realized that he had asked a silly question in his confusion. However, when he thought about the conflict between Baron Heidegger and the Senate, Scholar Dwayne remembered the real purpose of his visit. Prime Minister, I actually came to see you this time because I hope that you can stand up for young Master Joyce at the right time to inherit the Dukes of the North. Baron Heidegger was stunned. He was about to say that he had no right to speak on the issue of the succession of the Dukes of the North, but then he immediately understood Scholar Dwayne's true purpose. You want to use me to influence the Senate's decision, right? That's a smart approach. Okay, I'll find a suitable opportunity to help. At this point, Baron Heidegger suddenly stopped as if he had thought of something important. Prime Minister? Scholar Dwayne called out in confusion. Your train of thought has given me a lot of inspiration. Baron Heidegger came back to his senses and his face was full of excitement. At first, I thought that if Prince Lacy wanted to declare war on the mages through the Senate, I wouldn't be able to do anything. After all, you know that the Senate and I are like fire and water. But now, you've given me a new way of thinking. Perhaps, I can really use this method to influence the Senate's decision. Scholar Dwayne's eyes flashed. He understood what Baron Heidegger meant, so he asked carefully, So, do Do you support Prince Lacey's declaration of war on the mages, or do you oppose it? Oppose. Baron Heidegger said without hesitation. Now is not the best time to deal with Yule. Scholar Duane nodded in agreement. He also didn't think that it was the right time to provoke Yule. The northern frontier had just been stabilized, and it seemed that something was going to happen in the western region. It was not a wise move for the Empire to provoke the Mage Congress at this time. Moreover, Vera was also a mage. Scholar Duane was also worried that this trend would affect the succession of the Dukes of the North. Suddenly, Scholar Duane thought of another question. Oh, by the way, if Emperor Reinhard is unwilling to attend the Imperial Conference, then I'm afraid that he will not meet Miss Vera, right? Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, I don't think so. I heard some rumors saying that His Majesty has fallen ill and that he has even invited the Pope to treat him. I just don't know if this is true or just an excuse to delay the matter. Scholar Duane's heart was heavy. He began to feel that he and Vera would have to wait for a long time in Imperial Dragon City. At the very least, they would have to wait until the game between Prince Lacey and Emperor Reinhardt came to an end. This was an extremely dangerous political whirlpool. If they were not careful and got involved, Scholar Duane had a headache. Baron Heidegger seemed to have seen through Scholar Duane's worries, and he asked, What's wrong? Are you worried that the northern frontier will be in chaos if you stay in Imperial Dragon City for too long? The northern frontier should not be in chaos. Marquis Garcia is in Winter City. That's good. Baron Heidegger looked into Scholar Duane's eyes and said seriously, However, I would like to remind you that it would be best not to arrange for Vera to meet His Majesty before the outcome of this battle is out. But Baron Heidegger did not answer the question directly. Instead, he asked slowly, what kind of person is the easiest to get out of the whirlpool? Scholar Duane thought for a moment before he said, a person who has no burdens. Baron Heidegger smiled in relief and did not say anything else. He just meticulously peeled the sweet potato. The expression on his face was so serious that it seemed as though he was carefully carving a piece of art. Do you know? The yield of sweet potatoes is much higher than that of wheat. I have always wanted to promote sweet potatoes as a staple food to replace wheat, but I have not been able to get enough recognition. Scholar Duane smiled and said, That's because everyone can't bear to live without bread. Baron Heidegger snorted and said leisurely, Perhaps it won't be long before they are not qualified to be so picky about their food anymore. Scholar Duane nodded thoughtfully. When he saw Baron Heidegger eating the sweet potato, he could not help but ask, Prime Minister, Queen Medela will be hosting a banquet at the Phoenix Palace tonight to entertain Miss Vera and Viscount Angley. Aren't you going to attend? Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, No, I'm not going. The food at aristocratic banquets makes me sick. I still prefer a coarse food like sweet potatoes. Scholar Duane smiled faintly and did not try to persuade him anymore. He then picked up another sweet potato from the grill and blew on it while peeling it. When Baron Heidegger saw this, he asked, What's wrong? Aren't you going as well? Scholar Duane took a bite of the sweet potato and said with a smile, I'm not going. I also think that your family's banquet is more attractive. Baron Heidegger laughed heartily and said with a proud expression, That's right. You are the second person in the entire Radiant Empire who has such good taste. Oh? Scholar Duane asked curiously. Then I'm very curious. Who is the other person? Baron Heidegger smiled faintly and said a name, Tournens. Scholar Duane was shocked. He knew that this was the name of a cardinal of the Radiant Church. Moreover, this cardinal was the one who was ranked first among the 3 cardinals. Chapter 291. Colin, do you think it is appropriate for me to wear this to the palace banquet later? After changing her clothes, Vera gracefully walked to her husband's side and asked in a delicate voice. Colin's eyes lit up immediately. Vera chose a black-toned strapless dress with black silk stockings and silver stilettos, which set off her snow-white skin, making her look mysterious, noble, sexy, and elegant. You will definitely be the center of attention at the banquet, my dear. Vera was overjoyed when she heard her lover's compliment. She blushed as she placed her hand on Colin's shoulder and gently pushed him onto the sofa before she gave him a long and affectionate kiss. After a while, Vera lay on Colin's chest and enjoyed her lover's caress. Colin drew circles on Vera's back as he asked, "When do you think His Majesty will meet you?" Vera squinted her eyes comfortably like a lazy kitten and said in a daze, "I should be able to see His Majesty at the banquet tonight." Colin chuckled and shook his head before he said, "I think that His Majesty will still not show up at the banquet tonight." But Vera opened her eyes, her gaze still a little blurred. "My intuition," Colin replied in a slightly dignified tone. "I am afraid that this trip to Imperial Dragon City will not go as smoothly as I expected." "All right, don't think too much about it. Let me help you change your clothes, okay?" Vera tried to persuade him. "Beautiful lady, it's my pleasure." Colin stopped thinking about it and got up from the sofa with Vera in his arms. "Then you have to listen to my instructions and don't rush me. I just don't want to be late. If you behave yourself, we will not be late." It took the both of them more than 2 hours to get ready. At this time, Vera's face was red and she was panting. It seemed that helping Colin choose his clothes was indeed a big project. Then, the two of them boarded the carriage that was already waiting outside the palace and headed towards the Palace of Phoenix. Crystal candlesticks and chandeliers had already been lit up in the magnificent banquet hall. Hundreds of nobles from the imperial capital had gathered together, and it was extremely lively. Just as Colin had expected, Emperor Reinhardt didn't show up. The banquet was hosted by Empress Medela. Perhaps it was because Vera was still not one of the Dukes of the North, so the standard of this welcome banquet was not considered top-notch. The only person who really attended the banquet was Empress Medela. The Emperor, Prince Lexi, the Prime Minister of the Empire, and the 5 senators of the Senate were not present. Colin knew that one of the 5 senators in the Senate was from the House of St. Hilda. In terms of seniority, he was Vera's granduncle. However, he did not expect that even he would not be present at the welcome banquet. Hee, how interesting. After a round of toasts, the grand welcoming banquet officially began. Colin no longer cared about the current situation in the imperial capital. At this time, he focused on eating the delicious food on the table. He was not familiar with these people who stood at the top of the empire. Scholar Dwayne had gone to visit the Prime Minister of the Empire. Colin was going to wait for him to come back and discuss the current situation with him. The lemon-steamed sea base tasted very good, the pan-fried giant rhinoceros ribs were very chewy, the creamy lettuce was fresh and delicious, and the champagne was very intoxicating. Except for the deer blood wine, Colin was very satisfied with the banquet. It seemed that the palace chef was really good. When the candles in the crystal candlesticks were about to burn out, Empress Medela announced the end of the banquet. The guests returned to their respective lounges and asked the palace servants to clean up the tableware, change the candles, lay the carpet, and decorate the ball. After everything was ready, the guests returned to the hall. A melodious melody sounded and the ball officially began. Colin held Vera in his arms for the first dance, and then he planned to invite Empress Medela. He wanted to express his gratitude to her for preparing this welcome banquet, and also wanted to take this opportunity to test the attitude of the emperor. However, what Colin didn't expect was that someone would actually interfere. "Viscount Angley, may I invite you for the next dance?" Princess Judy stood in front of Colin. She was wearing a snow-white dress with flower petals and a princess laurel crown on her head. Her milky white face was flushed red. "Of course, it would be my pleasure," Colin responded politely. Refusing a lady's invitation to dance was not something a gentleman should do, let alone a young lady. Colin held Judy's little hand and stepped onto the red carpet dance floor. The melodious harp played a lively movement. Princess Judy was about 11 years old and was about 1.4 meters tall. She looked slender and elegant, but Colin still had to bend his knees to cooperate with her to put on a court dance stance. "Viscount Angley, Brother Harrison told me that you are very good at telling stories," Princess Judy whispered in Colin's ear. Colin guided the little girl to spin slowly on the dance floor. Hearing this, he smiled faintly and said, "Prince Harrison, you flatter me." At the same time, he was a little puzzled. Because from Prince Harrison's reaction when he saw Colin earlier, Colin should have left a big psychological scar on him. Why would he praise him for being good at telling stories? While he was thinking, Colin suddenly felt a weight on his foot, and then he heard Princess Judy's apology. "Ah, sorry, Viscount Angley, I accidentally stepped on you." "It's okay." Colin smiled and did not mind. "Can you tell me a story when you have time?" Princess Judy said coquettishly. Actually, my stories are not suitable for children to listen to." Just as Colin was trying to evade, he felt another weight on his foot. "Ah, sorry, Viscount Angley, I stepped on you again." Colin lowered his head and saw an apologetic and innocent face. However, Colin did not think that she did it unintentionally. "Your Highness, your court dance still needs more practice." "Yes. Why don't you teach me?" "Your Highness, you think too highly of me. I don't have the qualifications to be your dance teacher." "Viscount Angley, you are too polite. I feel that you dance better than my current dance teacher." While speaking, Princess Judy almost accidentally stepped on Colin a few times, but Colin dodged without leaving a trace. With Colin's reflexes and speed as a fifth-step knight, it was easy for him to dodge a little girl's step. However, Princess Judy was very persistent. Under her skirt, her crystal shoes kept poking out, as if she would not give up until she stepped on him. Her expression was sometimes annoyed, sometimes angry, sometimes gnashing her teeth. She completely threw away her cute and obedient disguise, revealing her mischievous nature. Colin smiled and did not say anything, elegantly dodging Princess Judy's step. At the same time, he did not forget to tease her. "Your Highness, your rhythm is messed up." Princess Judy ignored Colin and continued to focus on her task of stepping on his feet. This time, the dance became stuttering and there was no elegance to it. The surrounding audience also saw the clues and smiled. Obviously, they had some understanding of Princess Judy's temper. Seeing that she could not step on Colin, Princess Judy was so anxious that she was about to cry. Her pitiful appearance made people feel sorry for her. However, Colin would not be fooled. He guessed that this little girl was most likely acting. As if seeing that Colin was not fooled, Princess Judy rolled her eyes and suddenly said, "Viscount Angley, do you know why Father did not attend the banquet?" Colin's eyes narrowed and asked curiously, "Why?" However, Princess Judy smiled proudly and did not answer. Colin understood and could only sigh. He no longer dodged and allowed Princess Judy to ruthlessly step on his foot. The little girl suddenly smiled, as if she had won a great victory. She used all her strength to step on Colin's feet and said softly, "Because Father is sick." "Sick?" Colin's heart skipped a beat. He was about to continue asking when the music stopped. Princess Judy raised her small head, gathered her skirt, curtsied to Colin and then walked away. Seeing that she was running in the direction of Prince Harrison, she was probably going to show off to her brother. Colin shook his head with a smile. Then he saw Empress Medela walk over. She was wearing a palatial purple low-cut corset dress, revealing her round shoulders and large snow-white breasts. The exquisite tailoring outlined the perfect curves of her body. Her long golden hair was tied up in a noblewoman's bun, and her slender waist swayed as she walked. She was graceful, dignified, and charming, and made Colin fall into a daze for a moment. "Sorry, Viscount Angley, Judy is a little naughty." Colin smiled and said, "Not at all, Her Highness is very cute." The music started again. Empress Medela smiled and reached out her left hand. Colin hurriedly went forward and hugged the Empress' slender waist, swaying to the music. "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.